Luke shook out his arms, and the leader and the guard whom he had been using as cover fell to the ground, their bodies riddled with bullets. Crossing his arms, he slowly tucked the 2 Glocks back under his armpits. He took another step toward the southwest passage, leaving the hall that was filled with screams and groans. He didn't move quickly, and was limping again. When he walked out of the hall, the few guards who were still alive and could shoot kept quiet from fear. Although the man's back was facing them, and he was staggering as if he was about to collapse, they didn't have the courage to open fire. They could only watch as the person disappeared down the passage. Only then did they let out long breaths and soft sighs in unison. "Quick, call for help. Who is he? Who is he? Mom, I want to retire. I'm never going to be in a gang again." Luke, who was acting, limped out of range of the last surveillance camera in the catacombs, before he went back to normal. He quietly reached the foot of the mountain and got into his car. He took out a prepaid phone and sent a message to Gianna. Everything went smoothly. "Follow the plan." Gianna, who was waiting for the ambulance in her bedroom, was about to reach for her phone, when Cashin stopped her. Cashin saw that it was a text. He hesitated, then handed her the phone. Gianna opened the message, then let out a long sigh of relief. "Cashin, he sent it." Gianna nodded. "Everything's going smoothly. Get your men ready. The moment those people come for the autopsy, subdue them in one go." At that point, she laughed coldly. "I really have to thank my dear brother. The most troublesome old fellows were killed earlier, it'll be easier to control the rest. If he hadn't found Jonathan, it wouldn't have been easy for me to deal with these people. Now, these people's deaths are on his head, hee." Cashin nodded silently. Even if Santino was lucky enough to escape alive this time, he would definitely suffer. Even if the dust settled and Gianna came back to life, those people would still hate Santino. Who asked him to look for the boogeyman? Several old fellows of the Kimura family had been implicated and died. Their descendants probably wouldn't reason with Santino. Although this plan had been put together in a hurry, it was effective. In the end, it all depended on whether or not John could kill Santino. Once this goal was achieved, Gianna would be invincible. At that time, she would be the only descendant of the Kimura family, and one of the 12 members of the High Table. Luke drove back to the Rome Continental Hotel in a bloody state. When he arrived at the lobby from the hotel parking lot, many people only stared at him for a moment before looking away. They weren't too surprised. The guests here were all veterans in the industry. Injuries were common in this line of work. There was nothing much to see. At most, they would keep an eye on Luke and, when they were free later, ask around about what major incident had taken place in Rome tonight. Walking to the front desk, Luke said to the tall girl, "Book me a flight to New York for tomorrow morning." The receptionist nodded. "Yes, Mr. Wick." She glanced at his wounds and asked, "Do you need me to get someone to send you to the medical ward?" Luke shook his head. "No, have a first aid kit sent up to my room." As he spoke, he acted as if he was doing his best to keep himself together. However, he was still limping as he headed for the elevator. The Rome Continental Hotel was the final act. He had to pretend that he was heavily injured but was concealing it and pretending that they were ordinary injuries. "I'm sure Santino's dog will relay this information to her master." On a couch in the lobby, a young woman with short hair narrowed her eyes as she watched him disappear down the hallway. She picked up her phone and typed out a message: "He's returned to the hotel and booked a flight back to New York tomorrow morning." In New York, Santino read the message and his heart raced. Confirm her condition. If his operation was a success, you can come back. The short-haired woman understood. After sending the message, she got up and left the hotel. Regardless of the strife within the Kimura family, Luke boarded a flight back to New York at 9 o'clock the next morning. This time, the flight attendants were even more solicitous. Compared with a handsome man, an injured handsome man was clearly more effective in arousing their protective instincts. Luke was indifferent. During the flight, he read through the information on his phone. He only calmly said sorry or thank you to them. The information on his phone was from Gianna. It was basically about Santino's forces and important subordinates in New York. It wasn't easy for anyone else to get their hands on this information, but Gianna had always had it. Clearly, she was also wary of her troublesome brother. With this information, at least half of Santino's life was over. With Luke added into the mix, the ambitious second young master was doomed. After reading the information, Luke had even more thoughts. It was impossible for him to directly destroy Santino. That would result in a huge waste of experience and credit points, which would disappoint Daddy's system. Just like now, when he looked at the system prompt, he felt that the cooperation with Gianna had been worth it. System: kill important member of the Kimura family, Vittorio. Mission accomplished. Total experience, 3,000. Total credit, 3,000. Contribution rate, 100%. EXP plus 3,000. Credit plus 3,000. System: kill important member of the Kimura family, Quesapi. Mission accomplished. Total experience, 2,500. Total credit, 2,500. Wait. Out of the 8 mid and high-ranking Kimura leaders, none of them had less than 2,000 experience and credit points, which added up to a total of 21,000 experience and credit points. These 8 people were Gianna's assassination targets. She had even marked out their range of activities during the banquet. In fact, there were a total of 11 people on the list that Gianna had given to him. The 3 people who didn't get shot either ran fast or were far away. There was even one who he hadn't seen, and who had thus escaped disaster. In addition, the 2 guards whom Cashin had mobilized, Lucio and Frenin, were closer to Santino. Lucio and Frenin had charged into the basement with more than 60 guards to hunt Luke down, and most of them had died there. Gianna no longer had to worry about internal mischief threatening her personal safety. With more than 60 people, Luke earned another 15,000 experience and credit points. The system showed that the host's experience was 189,000/300,000. Credit, 205,000. The 36,000 experience and credit points earned was just from the Kimura banquet as the first half. The second half would continue in New York. Santino's influence in New York wasn't small. With him in the mix, Luke might be able to obtain a conservative estimate of more than 20,000 experience and credit points. He anticipated that it would take a few days for this large transaction to come through. In the end, killing Santino might yield an even more wonderful gain, opening the high EXP dungeon that was the high table. The subsequent gains would come in a steady stream. Luke thought that if he worked harder, he might be able to turn the high table into a serial instance. As he cleared each round, his experience and credit points would increase steadily. At his level of experience, it was time to drop in on the high table. Thinking that, Luke couldn't help but smile. Not far away, the senior flight attendant who had been sneaking glances at him was instantly dazed. Oh, is he smiling at me? He must be. I have hope. The flight attendant's beautiful dream didn't come true. Luke immediately got off the plane and took a cab to the New York Continental Hotel. It was already very late, but there were still 2 bellboys standing in front of the Continental Hotel, who opened the doors for him. Luke walked to the front desk and asked Sharon, "Is Winston asleep? I need to talk to him." "Sir is in the parlor," said Sharon. After a pause, he added, "Mr. Santino is speaking with him." Luke nodded. "Thank you." Sharon frowned as he watched Luke limp away with some difficulty. After some thought, he picked up the phone and made a call. "Sir, Mr. Wick is back and is headed to the parlor to look for you. He seems to be quite injured." Although Luke was limping, he wasn't slow. He quickly found Winston's parlor and knocked on the door. "Come in," Winston's deep voice said. Luke entered the room and met their eyes. His expression didn't change as he walked over to find a couch to sit on. Winston sized him up for a moment behind his gold-rimmed glasses before turning to Santino, who was also sizing up Luke. He raised his hand and said, "Just in time. He's here. You can ask him yourself, then sign the agreement before you leave." Santino's expression changed and he finally said, "John, the mission is completed?" Luke nodded. "Yes. The people you wanted me to kill are dead." "Santino, are you sure?" Luke said, "Yes." Santino fell silent. The room fell silent. It was Winston who broke the silence. "Gentlemen, the oath has been fulfilled and the marker has been honored. Shall we finish this last thing? So that this old man can rest early." Luke looked sideways at Santino. Santino's eyes flickered and he suddenly stood up. "I'm sorry, but I have to confirm the news before the oath can be considered fulfilled." Then, he looked down at the record book on the coffee table. "Winston, you should take this back first." A moment later, the two people in the room watched him disappear through the door before turning to look at each other. Winston asked, "Did you really kill Gianna and her men?" Luke said, "Yes." Winston took a few steps forward, picked up a glass of wine on the table, took a sip, and sighed. Jonathan, what do you want me to say?" "That was the future family head of the Camorra. She's dead. Do you think this is over?" "Santino isn't a good person." Luke said, "He holds the blood oath marker." Winston was at a loss for words. After a moment, he sighed again. "Every marker must be honored. Those who refuse a member of the High Table will be punished even more severely." Luke didn't say anything. In adult terms, Santino held John's blood oath marker. He could use this marker and request unconditional help from John. This was a rule of the High Table. As part of the power of the High Table, the Continental Hotel had to abide by this rule. At the same time, the Continental Hotel also oversaw the blood oath markers. Just now, Winston had wanted Santino to press his thumbprint in blood to the blood oath record book to prove that John's blood oath had been fulfilled. Why would you give a marker to someone like Santino? Winston shook his head and finally changed the subject. "You won't have much time. Santino will have to kill you if he wants to be the new head of Camorra. Although he's the one who asked you to kill Gianna, he has to avenge his sister." As he said this, Winston's eyes were mocking. This was really ironic. Luke said, "But he can't do it in the hotel, right?" Winston raised an eyebrow. "Of course. I'm willing to give the marker respect, but the High Table also has to respect my hotel." Luke nodded. "Then give me a room." Winston shook his head helplessly and pulled out his phone. "Sharon, give Jonathan a room." Luke nodded and left. "Thank you, Winston." Winston looked at his back and suddenly said, "Remember, you can't do anything in the hotel." Luke left without responding. However, he sighed in his heart. This old fox seems to have guessed a little of my plan. Just now, Winston wasn't worried that Santino would make a move, but that Luke would make a move on Santino. But Santino was in the hotel now. Should he kill Santino in the hotel? This was a problem. Luke immediately dismissed the idea. This wasn't in line with his plan. Moreover, only if Santino was alive could he send more heads. As long as the murderer who killed his sister Gianna wasn't dead, Santino's position as the new family head wouldn't be viewed as legitimate. Only when this boss was constantly summoning elite monsters to help him fight could Luke obtain the most number of experience and credit points. Besides, could Santino refrain from leaving the hotel? His sister had just died, and the position of family head was waiting to be inherited. It would already be pretty good if Santino could shelter in the Continental Hotel for 3 to 5 days. He would come out sooner or later. What Winston had just mentioned were the two rules that couldn't be violated. Luke, the fake John Wick, would definitely violate one of them, so he had to choose the one that aligned with his plan. At that time, there would definitely be a huge commotion at the high table. John Wick would definitely go down in history and become the blackest mark in the history of the high table. Although he had booked a room at the hotel, Luke left early in the morning. After disappearing into a civilian area, Luke quickly returned to his original appearance. 10 minutes later, he returned to his house in Clinton. After washing up and sleeping soundly for 2 hours, he got out of bed again and began to adjust his plans. Selina woke up at 6 in the morning and went to the lounge. Although the lounge looked no different from last night, she knew that a certain someone was back. She walked to the kitchen and smiled at Luke, who was making breakfast. "How was your trip?" Luke turned around and replied with a smile, "Not bad. It was just that there were too many beauties, which was annoying." Selina was lost for words. "Do you have any sense of shame at all? Look at you. Does it look like you're annoyed?" Luke shrugged. "That's because I'm home." Lost for words, Selina could only go and wash up. During breakfast, Luke told her what happened. After hearing the whole story, Selina's first words were, "You're not going to help John comfort Gianna, are you?" Luke looked at her in surprise. "How is that possible? She's the young miss of the Camorra and is about to become the head of the family. I would have killed her if not for the fact that she can help me learn about the 12 members of the high table." Selina knew him too well. Seeing his expression, she knew that he was serious. She couldn't help but scratch her head. "No way. She's so devoted. I thought you would sympathize with her." Luke took a sip of his latte. "Love, how many crimes have been committed under the pretense of this label?" Unlike before, whenever Selina was free now, she would read some classic and well-known precepts to jog her intellect. Listening to Luke's words, she frowned. "Are you saying that she doesn't love John that much, or maybe it isn't love at all?" Luke shook his head. "Whether or not she loves John and how many bad things she's done are two different things. Besides, she didn't do them for John, and I'm not John." Pausing for a moment, he then said, "It's in our interest to keep her alive. It won't be much of a difference if there was one more or less of the 12 members of the high table, but I can get a lot of information from her. I don't believe that they're close. There are probably enemies at the high table, and it definitely won't be just one. This is more valuable than just killing Gianna." Selina was a little confused. "But you just said that she's a bad person." Luke shrugged. "I know, but technically, most of the magnates in this country are bad guys. How many people have broken down and jumped off a building because of Wall Street financiers? Even if I abhor evil, I shouldn't kill all of them first. Their names are all in the financial news, there's no need to investigate them." Selina nodded subconsciously. Wall Street financiers were all bloodsuckers. This was the basic understanding of the people on the bottom rung of American society. It was an ingrained understanding, like the daily habit of cursing out the president. Luke said, "Look, even if I hate evil, there are countless villains in this country on the surface, and I won't be able to get rid of all of them in my lifetime, so I can only rely on personal judgment to make a choice. Also, the Camorra may become my best spy at the high table, so of course I won't deal with it right away." Pondering for a moment, Selina was still a little puzzled. "But the Camorra has done quite a lot of damage, right?" Luke was amused. "I'm not a machine, nor am I a god. Of course I have my own thoughts. I can only say that if Gianna does something I can't tolerate, I'll kill her, even if she's my mole. Is that clear?" Selina rolled her eyes and suddenly asked, "Will you kill me if I do something that you can't tolerate?" Luke looked at her like she was an idiot. "Firstly, that's not how you think. Secondly, there's no reason for you to. Thirdly, if you really did it, I would teach you the 12-word mantra until it's ingrained in you." Looking at his strange expression, Selina shivered. She was very familiar with that gaze, which meant that he was thinking about something extremely bad. For example, when he tortured Kilgrave with a basketball last time, he had pretty much the same expression on his face. She decisively abandoned this unpleasant topic and quickly finished breakfast before she went to train. Luke couldn't help but shake his head. This silly girl followed him every day, and still assumed that she could do something bad. Did he learn mental communication for nothing? His use of mental communication with Selena wasn't mental control. It was the subtle influence of their interactions, which made Selena conscious of her bottom line. Unless it was some kind of mental control or interference from some mysterious force, she would never lose control. But Gold Nugget wasn't a freeloader either. Whether it was direct mental control or something like Kilgrave's physical control, it was pretty much impossible to control Selena. You, do something bad? Hee, just be good and be a righteous warrior in this life. The most you would do is earn a bit of dirty money to top up your personal stash. As for Selena's questions, he had already come to a conclusion. He had lived up to his 30s in his last life, and had been a master online user for many years in an era which had seen an explosion of information. His own worldview had long been set in stone. Luke had just one basic requirement for himself: don't be a bad guy. Naturally, he wouldn't force himself to be a good person or some emissary of justice. As the saying went, do your best to live up to expectations, but with a clear conscience. He tried to do what he could, and didn't bother with anything that he couldn't do in reality. It was for this reason that Luke didn't feel arrogant, even though he had killed a lot of bad guys and done a lot of good deeds. He also never felt that he was some high and mighty savior of the world who had to show benevolence and uphold justice. He was just himself. It was enough to be a kind-hearted, ordinary person. In the morning, Luke and Selena went to work as usual, reaffirming their colleagues' impression that they were still around. Once again, they dumped a large pile of cupcakes with Connie. Luke also accepted a major theft case from Dustin. After Luke left Dustin's office, he talked to Joe about whether or not Detective John was still being a sh*t recently. This was indispensable small talk. Joe's answer was as expected. Yes, he's a pile of sh*t right now. Luke and Selena could only shrug helplessly. They had lunch and brought food back for Dustin and Elsa, before staying to chat with Elsa for a bit. With little Snail collecting intelligence, Selena had more inside information of some incidents in New York than Elsa did. But the SMART program couldn't summarize things like overall law and order in New York, office politics in NYPD, and the meaning behind promotions and transfers in important departments. Elsa now knew a thing or two about this. She had discussed it with Dustin. To a large extent, her intelligence gathering had already started to turn inward instead of outward. Here, Luke heard a pretty big piece of news. Samantha Reyes, the district attorney who was interested in running for council member in the next election, had suddenly become a public enemy. There was evidence that she had violated regulations multiple times during her term in office and obstructed justice, and even caused the deaths of innocent people. Now, the federal prosecutor was about to investigate her. If the hearsay was true, even if just one or two rumors were confirmed, Samantha Reyes was in danger of losing her job and would likely go to prison. Luke simply nodded with a smile and didn't say anything. He didn't know if Reyes would lose her job this time, but he knew better than anyone else that she would definitely start to suffer. A small punishment wouldn't kill her. At most, nothing would go smoothly for her. But the news also came with another piece of information that had to do a little more with Luke and the others. Lawyer Jennifer, whom they suspected to be Dustin's girlfriend, had come to New York after her recovery, and had become an assistant district attorney. Elsa had no idea how Dustin had managed to charm Jennifer into moving and switching jobs for him. However, that was a private matter between Dustin and Jennifer, and nobody wanted to look into it. But after Jennifer came to New York and stepped into her new role, District Attorney Reyes, who disdained her, never made it official. This time, Reyes had been too busy protecting herself, and Jennifer successfully took formal office. Now, they had to call her DA Jennifer. There were plenty of district attorneys and assistant district attorneys in New York's DA's office, so it actually wasn't anything surprising. But for Dustin, this small-time leader, he now knew someone in 3 government departments, which would prove very convenient when working cases. However, Dustin had kept Jennifer hidden very well, and she hadn't shown up as his girlfriend yet, so there was no need to celebrate her position. Everyone in Dustin's department was told they could look for Jennifer if they needed anything. There was another piece of department news, which was that HQ might be moving against the 15th precinct. It was impossible for HQ to get rid of all the police officers of the 15th precinct, it was just that they were getting a new precinct chief. For now, no one knew exactly who this person was. Luke guessed that this might have something to do with his and Matt's part-time job. When Kingpin's forces started to pull back significantly and go into hiding, they no longer provided the dirty cops with any more help. The other gangs were also left to flail around haplessly, and law and order in Clinton improved significantly. Perhaps HQ had discovered something, which was why they wanted to tidy up the 15th precinct. Transferring a chief over wasn't a big move and might not be effective. But the new boss of the 15th precinct just had to refuse to work with the gangs. Those who didn't want to be dirty cops, like Sergeant Mahoney, would definitely cry tears of joy. While it didn't affect Luke and Selena much, this was good news nonetheless. After listening to Elsa share her information, Luke and Selena left for the Nassau County lab. At the lab, Luke dropped in on John Wick, who was in their custody. In the lab, an unused workshop had been tidied up to serve as a temporary dark room. Of course, it wasn't really dark. It had lights and a TV, and all kinds of books. Except for the fact that nobody was talking, it actually wasn't too hard to bear for a typical shut-in. That dog with the square head and no name was also with John. However, it enjoyed much better treatment than John. It came out of the small pet door twice daily for some fresh air under Gold Nugget's watch. So, while John hadn't been doing well in the last few days, it hadn't been hard either. The lab door opened and Luke walked in. At that moment, he was dressed as V. Looking at the strange smiling face mask, John was a lot calmer. He wasn't in a hurry to say anything, and just looked at Luke silently. Luke didn't waste any time. He said directly, "Have you thought about my suggestion?" "John, does it matter if I agree or not?" Pondering for a few seconds, Luke nodded and said, "Yes. At the very least, I'll feel a lot more relaxed when I take the blame in your guys." Stunned for a moment, John had a bad feeling. "What did you do?" Luke chuckled. "Your old line of work, of course. You charged into a Kimura party and opened fire, killing dozens of people." John's eyes widened. "WTF?" Luke said, "Poise, preserve your poise as a super killer. Also, don't worry. Your old lover is fine. Hee, no wonder you refused to fulfill the blood oath." John, who had been poker-faced all this time, finally couldn't help but open his mouth. "What? Gianna and I were never like that." Luke said, "How do you know which old lover I was talking about?" What a hypocrite. Looking at the changes in John's expression, he stopped joking. "It seems you're not refusing my offer, right?" John's lips twitched. "How can I refuse? You locked me up here, sh*t. Luke simply continued, "Now, let's discuss a new situation. For example, let's say that you kill Santino instead of your old lover. How will the Continental Hotel react? How will the High Table react? Who will they send to deal with you?" John was immediately enlightened and instantly understood Luke's meaning. "You want to use my appearance to kill Santino? And you want to deal with the Continental Hotel and the High Table? You're crazy, you'll be excommunicated. The High Table and the Continental Hotel will refuse to provide you any services." He was suddenly stumped. Luke tilted his head and chuckled. "You get it now. Indeed, the one who will be excommunicated is you. John couldn't help but smile bitterly. Yes, it was John Wick who was about to do these earth-shattering things. What did it have to do with V? The High Table and the Continental Hotel would issue a double bounty, and countless hitmen and mercenaries would come running for the massive rewards as well as special contribution bonuses from the High Table. But they were all after John Wick. Did V care? Obviously not. John was a hitman who lived within the High Table's range, but nobody knew V's real identity. Thus, the bounty would have nothing to do with V, and nobody would make trouble for him. As for being excommunicated, that didn't affect V at all. V had never used the services of the High Table, and lived as a free man. All that was John Wick's problem. Luke looked at him with great interest. Now, are you interested in giving up your identity? After a brief silence, John Wick asked, what if I still don't agree? Pondering for a moment, Luke said, then I can only lock you up for a few months or a year, before I send you to South America or Africa. Whether you live or die after that will depend on your luck. John was surprised. You won't kill me. Luke said, I will be doing things under your identity, but your life is yours. He was telling the truth. John barely attacked ordinary people, and had been retired for years. For the sake of his handsome face and for helping Luke take the blame, letting him live was a small matter. A year would be enough for Luke to learn most of the situation at the High Table. If he found another hitman to replace after that, he could continue wandering this underworld. By then, if John was still alive, so what? What else could he say, except that V had locked him up for a year? It wasn't like Winston didn't know about V's existence, yet he had done nothing. Compared with the untraceable V, the High Table would definitely be more happy to kill John and maintain their reputation. Countless thoughts flashed through John's mind before he finally took a deep breath. I agree. However, I want to stay here for a while, like this is fine. Luke was curious. You don't want to leave now? John shook his head. Since I've given you this identity, why would I go out now? I might as well stay here and think about where I can retire in the future. Can you pack up the personal items at home for me? They're mainly photos of me and my wife. Luke said, sure. I'll go over later and pack them all up, and bring them over tomorrow. Is that all? John nodded. Deal. Luke was about to leave, when John thought of something. Wait, I have a request. Luke, John said, can you bring in some workout equipment? I feel like my body is going to rust. Luke said, I'll get a treadmill. Both of you can use it. John looked at the silly dog lying on the ground and smiled bitterly. All right, both of us can indeed use it. Luke, however, had already walked out of the workshop by then. Selina looked at him in admiration. You've already decided what you're going to do. Does it matter whether or not he agrees? The worst outcome would just be throwing him out a year later. Luke said, that's why I've been saying, I'll make him an offer he can't refuse. That made sense, and Selina found that she couldn't retort to that. That night, Luke and John sat opposite each other in the dark room. Looking at the dark red blood flow into the syringe, John finally said, is that necessary? Luke raised his head. I haven't examined you since you got injured last time. This is a necessary checkup. John asked, what sort of checkup requires 400 cc of blood? Luke said, my physical examination is more meticulous. John, as long as you're happy. He was 100% certain that this guy wasn't drawing his blood for a checkup. But he had no choice, and just gave up. After the blood was drawn, Luke drew the needle out, pleased, and pressed a cotton swab to John's wrist. Get some rest. After some time, you'll be able to go to Brazil, and sleep with a hot woman. John rolled his eyes and didn't say anything. Luke chuckled. It seems you don't like Brazilian women. You should go to Africa and look for African women then. John couldn't help but say, I have a wife. I don't need another woman, no matter if they're Latin American or African. Luke said, got it. I'll pack up your wife's photos, but you can't sleep with the photos, right? You should find a real woman. As he spoke, he walked to the door of the dark room. John asked, are you really going to let me out? Luke turned around, shook his head and smiled. Why wouldn't I? As he spoke, he walked out of the dark room and closed the door again. Even if John was released a year later, how would it affect V? It didn't matter if John was dead or alive, or if he was capable of making the High Table give up on him. However, it was highly unlikely that the High Table would let John go, unless he asked that big sister Gianna for help. I can't afford to mess with this big sister. I'll leave her to John. He'll be very happy, I'm sure. Luke put the syringe back into his inventory with a smile. Now, his inventory was divided into two parts. Luke named the earliest and largest part, Space 1, while the part that was only 1 cubic meter in size was called Space 2. The blood would stay in Space 1 and wouldn't decompose. Apart from the temperature, it would be no different from when it was first extracted, and no one would notice anything wrong with it. Selena walked out of the training room. Are you starting? Luke said, Santino probably can't hold back anymore and wants to put out a bounty. The reward definitely won't be low. It won't be long before those hitmen start looking for John. Selena asked, are you sure you'll be fine? Trust me, it'll be fine. Luke took off his V outfit and put on his close-fitting combat suit, before he put on a suit and leather shoes. Selena watched from the side. After he was done, he was about to put on the Thousand Faces mask, when she said, wait, don't put on the mask yet. Let me take a photo first. Luke obeyed readily. Selena said, Sponge, shoot him from every angle. Yes, ma'am, Sponge replied immediately. Luke was amused. What, you want to keep it as a memento? Let me make it clear, you can't take it out or use it as a screensaver. His suit had been custom-made by the Continental Hotel, and a closer look would still reveal hints of its origin. Selena snorted. Do you think I'm an idiot? I'm just going to get Sponge to use it as a background here. Luke said, as long as you're happy. Actually, Selena was doing this for one simple reason, Luke practically never wore a suit in front of her. Naturally, she found this rare getup very novel. Putting on the mask, Luke's face turned into John Wick's, and his expression changed. Looking at the poker face, Selena snorted and left. Although he was handsome, she didn't want to hang around with him, even if she knew that it was Luke. Luke didn't waste any more time. He drove an old, unmarked car out of the underground garage. As he drove, John's phone rang. He pressed the speaker, and a voice rang out. Hello, John. This may make you unhappy, and I know it's personal, but if I don't avenge my sister's murderer, would I still be human? After the voice on the phone was done, Luke hung up and blacklisted the number. Santino had turned hostile. However, he was still in the mood to call John. Was he afraid that John would try to kill him even surrounded by bodyguards? That was probably it. Even if it didn't work, he wanted to do his best to weaken the boogeyman's killing intent. But if John didn't die, Santino couldn't be considered human, like he had said over the phone. Naturally, Luke didn't have to listen to his nonsense. On the other end, Santino silently put down his titanium phone and frowned at the titanium phone until the screen locked itself. Finally, he turned the screen on again and dialed a number. Operator. How may I direct your call? Accounts payable. One moment please. This is accounts payable. How may I help you? I want to open a new account. Name on the account? John Wick. Verification. 9305 to 2005. State of contract. Open. Denomination. 10 million. With additional special interest. Processing. Please hold. Order confirmed. Boogeyman John didn't look like he was in a desperate situation at all, but more like he was mocking the crowd. I killed more than 20 of you easily, while you couldn't do anything to me. Motivated by the bounty, and embarrassed and angry, their eyes turned a little red. Even though many people remained calm, they gritted their teeth and chased after Luke, unwilling to give up. After everybody left, 2 old Ford vans arrived. The doors opened, and a dozen men in cleaning gear got out. They took out various cleaning tools and body bags and got to work around the villa. In less than half an hour, all the bodies had been collected. This time, they moved more than 20 bodies. In fact, 17 other hitmen had completely disappeared without a trace. The cleaners didn't know that they were dead, and neither did the hitmen. Luke, on the other hand, was feeling elated as he looked at his rapidly increasing experience and credit points. Thanks to Luke's nagging, the system didn't consider the hitmen as a collective tonight, but gave him a notification every time he killed one. 40 hitmen had already given him more than 10,000 experience and credit points. And that was just the appetizer. The best battleground for the boogeyman had never been open spaces. The villa, for example, was surrounded by dozens of meters of empty lawn. In the face of fully equipped hitmen, even elementary self-healing wouldn't be of much use. Luke relied completely on his stealth suit to slink around. But if he did this too much, the hitman's morale would quickly collapse. After all, if Luke killed hundreds of them when they couldn't even catch a trace of his shadow, only a lunatic would dare come and court death. Thus, he had to direct them to the battlefield most suitable for the boogeyman so that they couldn't keep track of the deaths of their comrades. And that battlefield was Harlem. If there were more attackers, he would gradually move north. And further down was the Clinton area, which he wanted to avoid. Lawyer Matt's night life had been a little full lately, and Luke didn't plan to let him disrupt things. It would be bad if he got a concussion again. With a deafening rumble of engines, more than 20 cars rushed into Harlem. On the way, more cars would appear every now and then. These hitmen had received real-time mission notifications, and came to intercept Luke, but nobody could stop him. Many hitmen cursed. F***CK, who's giving us this rotten information? Why did no one mention the boogeyman's driving skills? How are we supposed to chase him? It wasn't long before they stopped cursing. The Dodge Challenger, which was speeding along the street, was finally hit by a car from the side and flung into an alley. The convertible that had stopped the Dodge Challenger charged out, and 2 people forced their way into the alley. By the time they reached the Dodge Challenger, it was already empty and smoking under the hood. Looking at each other, they carefully split up and quickly ran deeper into the alley. They were very fast, but their steps were practically soundless, which showed that they were far more professional than ordinary hitmen. A few seconds after they entered the alley, 2 cars arrived almost at the same time. One person got out of one car, and 2 people got out of the other. They looked at each other and nodded, as if they had wrapped up some discussion. The gist of it was basically, each side relied on their own abilities and wouldn't attack each other. It wasn't because they were all on the same page, but because this mission had been assigned by someone attached to the high table. If someone became a hindrance during this mission, allowing the boogeyman to escape, it would be reported to all the participants. By then, even if the boogeyman wasn't dead, the hindrance certainly would be. The boogeyman's track record was also made public as part of the information on him. For example, John had killed hundreds of people in a mission a few years ago. Also, John clashed with the head of the Tarasov family last month, and more than 100 people from the Tarasov family died. 2 days ago, John killed more than 70 people at D'Antonio's estate, and was heavily wounded in the process. It was unrealistic to rely on someone who would drag his peers down and wanted to hog the bounty for himself. The best chance still was that they could only rely on luck and try to kill John when he was in a tight spot. The hitmen who were confident in their own abilities and were happy to hear about John's severe injuries didn't hesitate and joined the chase. After they entered the alley, more hitmen arrived. Seeing the cars that had been abandoned at the mouth of the alley, everybody understood. This was the slums of Harlem. Old apartment buildings were everywhere and the streets were narrow. They couldn't drive fast enough here, you could even run on foot through a small gap or take a small lane to detour around and block the car. No wonder the boogeyman had abandoned the car and run. It would be very hard to find him once he hit here. But most of the hitmen still chose to enter the area. Some simply picked up their weapons and set out on foot, while some drove around. Most of the people on foot were good at tracking, while the drivers were trying their luck. Actually, Luke's operation to harvest points tonight had only just officially begun. Looking at the red dots on his lenses, which covered the area like a huge net, Luke smiled. At that moment, he was standing in a corner on top of an apartment building. In the dark, however, only someone standing at a particular angle would be able to see that the air here was slightly distorted. Apart from that, this was just an empty corner of a building. Behind him, a man with a big bag on his back opened the rooftop door and stepped out. Glancing around the rooftop, he chose Luke's corner and opened a big box. The man took out a titanium phone and deftly operated it. A small drone quickly rose from the box, and a surveillance feed appeared. Luke's lips twitched. Damn, he had run into a hitman who worked more or less the same way he did. The guy didn't go down to look for him. Instead, he chose to carry out a search with a drone from this rooftop. It had to be said that the hitmen who had come to kill the boogeyman were much more skilled. The group of people who died earlier had infrared and night vision gear. They weren't low-level hitmen who would charge forward with just a few guns. Thinking that, Luke watched as the drone aimed its camera at the hitman. He was testing the drone to make sure that it was normal. Suddenly, the man drew the phone closer with a puzzled expression. Just now, he felt something odd about the image from the drone. There was something wrong with the image he was seeing. Naturally, Luke saw it. Luke just happened to be in the way of the drone's camera as it was aimed at the hitman from above. The drone's camera was focused on the hitman through Luke, who was invisible, so the image was slightly distorted. An ordinary person might brush off this anomaly, but this tech-savvy hitman clearly liked to get to the bottom of things. Puzzled, he stepped closer with his phone. Right at that moment, someone behind him said, "Sci, you know too much." Before the hitman could react, there was a crack as he was hit in the back of his head, and he blacked out. Then, his phone was taken away, and the drone landed. A few seconds later, there was nobody on the roof once more. A distorted mass of air jumped swiftly over the rooftops of the densely packed apartment buildings and landed on a fire escape dozens of meters away. One of the hitmen happened to open a window. Just as he was about to come out, he felt a strong wind attack him. His heart jolted, and in the midst of the excruciating pain, he collapsed backward, paralyzed. He passed out before he even hit the ground. The two people sleeping in the bedroom didn't hear anything. The door that was open a crack was the only evidence that someone had been here. Matt was bummed. He hadn't encountered many good things recently, but had run into a lot of bad luck. After the ninjas disappeared, Kingpin's forces disappeared as well. The Russian and Irish gangs were wiped out, and all the smaller gangs had run out of luck. Law and order in Clinton had improved significantly, but he had been injured again and again. In the span of a short 2 months, he had been slashed with a sickle, shot, given an electric shock and drugged. His vigilante career was suddenly so colorful. Fortunately, everything was worth it. Although he and Karen had just made some progress before his ex-girlfriend strongly stuck her foot into it, and things were shaky and on the point of falling apart, his self-imposed duty was to Hell's Kitchen and to saving innocent people who were in danger. If he lost a girlfriend, he lost a girlfriend, or, perhaps, he wasn't meant to have one. Otherwise, why would he have an ex-girlfriend? The troublesome thing was that not only was his ex messing up his new relationship, she had brought an even bigger problem with her. She had asked for his help to fix the problem, and acted as if she was still in love with him. But Matt really didn't want to be entangled with her anymore, and didn't know how to send his twisted ex away. In his vexation, he could only go out every night to to mete out justice and soothe his nerves to keep it together. The Clinton area was too peaceful, so he went to the Harlem area further north. But tonight, Lawyer Matt, who was used to squatting on rooftops on his own, suddenly realized that there were many strangers around him with the same sort of interest. From the faint sounds they were making, it was clear that they were armed. It wasn't just one or two of them, but an endless flow of people from all directions. Matt had good hearing, but he didn't have enough brains. Many people could see hundreds or thousands of people at the same time, but couldn't remember all their appearances and record their expressions at the same time. Just because Matt could hear them didn't mean that he could monitor all of them. Not only that, there were also hurried footsteps in many alleys, but no calls for help or gunshots. Was there going to be a gang fight here? The thought flashed through Matt's mind, before he dismissed it. These people were operating on their own. Even though they were very professional, it was only 3 to 5 people in each team at most. A gang fight was either a chaotic fight between weaklings or a short exchange instigated by minor leaders with limited authority. Before Lawyer Matt could figure it out, he ran into bad luck. Sensing danger, he abruptly rolled and threw out the short rod that he was holding. Dong! A hitman who had just raised his rifle at Matt's back was hit hard in the chest by the end of the rod, and he couldn't help but take 2 steps back. Matt's face changed. That wasn't right. The rod hadn't hit flesh, but something hard. Before the hitman could react, Matt flicked his wrist, and the metal rope attached to the rod wrapped around the hitman's upper torso. He pulled hard, and the hitman staggered and fell to the ground. Matt lunged forward and grabbed the man. "Who are you? Why do you want to kill me?" he asked in a low voice. The hitman didn't answer, but reached for the military knife between his legs. Matt moved faster, and jabbed another rod into the man's armpit without hesitation. Crack! The hitman screamed in pain as the rod instantly broke his ribs. A wise man knew better than to fight when the odds were against him, and the hitman decisively explained why he was chasing Boogeyman John. He was extremely depressed at being subdued. How was he supposed to know this was going to happen? The guy in front of him was wearing a bizarre dark red outfit, and his entire face was covered. He wasn't the hitman's target at all. He had just wanted to kill the man and take this lookout position as soon as possible. When he completed missions, he was always straightforward and didn't mind getting rid of civilians who got in his way. After confessing his purpose, and before he could beg for mercy, a rod fell heavily. With a crack, both the hitman's arms and legs, and his ankles and fingers were broken. Matt didn't kill anyone, but he didn't show any mercy to this guy who made money from killing people. The man would still be able to walk in the future, but it would be impossible to run or jump around. He would be able to eat and drink with his own hands, but it would be impossible for him to hold a gun steady and kill someone. It could be said that the hitman would be retired after tonight. Tying up the hitman with his own clothes, Matt took out the hitman's phone and called the police. After giving the address, Matt jumped off. According to the hitman, a lot of his colleagues had come tonight to specifically hunt down a super hitman called the Boogeyman. Who knew how many innocent people would be implicated if these unbridled killers started fighting? Matt had to stop them no matter what. Luke gently stretched out his hand and placed it at the corner. A hitman was hurrying over with a gun raised warily. He had seen the Boogeyman run into this alley just now. His suit and beard were too conspicuous, and he didn't seem to have noticed the hitman. 2 meters behind him was his partner, who was keeping an eye out from the rear. He stuck his gun out around the corner, but didn't notice anything, so he simply pressed forward. What he didn't know was that a transparent hand was 20 centimeters above his head. After he passed by, so did his partner. Crack. His partner's neck cracked slightly, and the hitman in front felt that something was wrong. He was about to turn around. Crack. The back of his head caved in a little. Two bodies collapsed and were instantly dragged back into the alley. 57. Luke counted in his heart and put the bodies into the first inventory space. This area, which had a complicated layout, no surveillance cameras, dark alleys, stairs, roofs, and empty homes, was the most suitable hunting ground for him. He had killed almost 20 hitmen in this hunting ground. None of them were worth less than 200 experience and credit points, and one was even worth more than 500. There were 2 weak chickens worth over 200 points, and 3 worth more than 400 points. This could only mean that this bunch of hitmen had committed even more heinous deeds, and all of them deserved to die. There were no gunshots, no blood, and no bodies. It had been quiet for more than 10 minutes, and he had earned almost 7,000 experience and credit points. He was practically practicing environmental protection. If NYPD knew, they would definitely give him the most conscientious hitman award for not adding to their burden at all. Almost 20 hitmen had died, but the other hitmen were unaware, nor did they flee in fear. In 2 or 3 hours, everything would return to normal. Nobody would know what happened. None of the hitmen, the Continental Hotel or the High Table would know. Daddy System, please bless me and help me finish this job. Luke prayed inwardly. Bang! 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 Luke frowned. What was going on? He pulled up an image from the direction of the gunshots and saw a familiar figure. He couldn't help but curse out loud. What was going on with this guy? Luke was in Harlem, but had still run into him. Did he have sharp ears? But he knew that it was probably because nothing was happening in the Clinton area, so Red Matt had come out a little further tonight. It's my fault. I cleaned up Clinton too well. Luke felt helpless, but wasn't in a hurry. The suit Matt was wearing was distinctive, and the hitmen could tell at a glance that it wasn't John. They weren't interested in wasting time on him. As long as he wasn't surrounded, the man in the dark red suit would still be able to withstand a few bullets. But watching Matt knock out a hitman with a couple of rods and then throw him into a dumpster, Luke's lips twitched. You really didn't kill anyone, but your attacks are no less ruthless than the knee breakers. On the screen, the hitman's limbs were twisted at a weird angle after he was hit by the rods. He would probably be half crippled for the rest of his life. Thinking that, Luke didn't continue watching, and moved further away. Tonight was a feast of points. He didn't have time to bother with Red Matt, and could just pull the battlefield a little further away. A moment later, there were a few more gunshots, and the hitmen moved further north as they followed John, who had suddenly exposed himself. 5 minutes later, Luke frowned. Looking at Matt, who was fighting 2 more killers on the drone feed, he cursed in his heart. Not only did Matt chase them, he also found 2 more hitmen. It was a good thing that the 2 hitmen weren't as good at close combat as Matt. They were flustered at close range and were overwhelmed, otherwise Lawyer Matt would have been shot again. I can't let Matt get involved in this again, Luke thought. Tonight was the official clash between John and the hitmen of the High Table, and the conflict between the 2 parties would become even more intense in the future. If Matt fought here, it would be very easy to speculate that he was John's accomplice. The High Table wasn't afraid of killing the wrong person in the name of not letting anyone off. Matt's secret identity as a vigilante on the street would be very worrying, and the High Table would very easily uncover his real identity. Making up his mind, Luke turned invisible and quickly approached Matt's location. Matt was breathing hard as he slammed his elbow into the back of the man's head. The Asian fatty who was built a little like a sumo wrestler instantly slowed down. He was resistant to blows, but there wasn't much flesh on the back of his head, and it wasn't much more resistant to attacks than an ordinary person's. Matt had been sent flying twice by this man. He finally found an opportunity to climb onto the man's back and then put all his strength into an elbow strike. After another heavy elbow strike, the eyes of the extremely strong fatty under him finally rolled back. His knees buckled and he fell to the ground with a muffled thump. Matt was exhausted. He lay there for a few seconds without moving. That had been too hard to deal with. He had beaten up many people, but it was rare to find an opponent as hard to deal with as this fatty. When he hit the fatty with his rods, all the fatty did was just jolt a few times and yell in pain. The man had hit Matt a few times. Matt had almost passed out at the last strike. Who the hell was this boogeyman John? If he had attracted so many hitmen and they were all on the same level as this fatty, how strong was he? Matt cursed inwardly. Suddenly, he moved. With his hearing, he could sense that someone was lunging at him. A second ago, he hadn't sensed the man at all. Boogeyman John. Only a super killer who was good at hiding had this ability. Matt's mind raced, and he rolled to avoid the guy. But he was only halfway through his roll, when he suddenly stopped as an ear-piercing noise rang out. Given how sharp his hearing was, he instantly froze and couldn't move. What the hell was that? Matt was shocked. Actually, it was completely quiet around him. This was a sound that only Matt could hear with his extraordinary hearing. Luke turned off the device, and the red indicator turned dark. Seeing that Matt couldn't move, he was very satisfied. Coming out here to look for someone to beat up, you think I can't deal with you? This device was a subsonic weapon invented by Tony. Obadiah had even personally tested it on the Tycoon, and it could instantly paralyze a person. Most of the time, Luke didn't need to use this special weapon since it would easily expose him. It was most suitable for dealing with Lawyer Matt, a combat expert who was difficult to beat up and who was especially agile. Every creature had its weakness. A subsonic weapon that could only be effective when placed within 30 cms of an ordinary person's ear was effective against Matt 5 meters away. Matt, who dealt in close combat every day, didn't stand a chance. He tried to move, but couldn't control his body. His ears were still ringing. Luke took out a gun and aimed it at Matt's palm. Duh. Duh. An anesthetic? Motherf asterisk cur. Looking at the special bullet in his palm, Matt's stiff body suddenly turned limp. Luke walked over and plucked the tranquilizer from his palm. He then felt around and then took out the fatty's pistol. Pa! Pa! A hole appeared in the heads of the fatty and his accomplice, who was struggling to escape 7 or 8 meters away. Throwing the gun at the fatty, Luke dragged Matt into an apartment building. He soon found an old apartment that hadn't been occupied for days. He stuffed the busybody under the bed and left. Luke didn't have time to send Matt back, and even had to make some changes to his plan because of this guy. Letting him sleep under a bed was already letting him off easy. He thought of how people who got in the hitman's way in the movies were knocked out and stuffed either into the bathroom or the closet. Luke stood on the roof and looked at the red dots on the map. Thinking for a moment, he decided that he couldn't hide anymore. The boogeyman had to show his face. If it wasn't for Matt, he could have played hide-and-seek with the others until midnight. If John never appeared after Matt appeared, would the high table eventually be suspicious of Matt? Was Matt John's accomplice, and had only shown up to distract everyone? Or was Matt someone else's pawn, specifically targeting the high table? It was very likely that the high table would be confused. After all, Matt had knocked out several hitmen and was wearing such a flashy getup. John now had to put on a big show and fight the hitmen head-on, which would set Matt up as an unimportant intruder. That was why Luke had knocked Matt out. There could only be one male lead tonight, and that was Boogeyman John. Making up his mind, Luke cancelled the stealth function on his suit and stored it in his inventory, revealing the Boogeyman's standard suit. After slicking his hair back and making sure it wasn't a mess, he took out an August. This was a completely personal modified gun which he had picked up from a hitman. Luke had hardly ever used a gun like this before, and it was quite accurate and convenient for shooting at mid-range. He bent down and went to a roof. After adjusting his breathing for a moment, he suddenly got up and raised his gun. A hitman was using binoculars to look for the target from a rooftop 200 meters away. A person entered his line of sight. His black suit wasn't eye-catching, but the gun he was holding sparked in the distance. F***CK. The hitman was shocked and vigilant. Bang! 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 He heard gunshots. Crack! One of the bullets pierced the binoculars and didn't stop. The hitman was still for several seconds before he collapsed. One of his eyes had turned into a hole, the area around it mangled by broken binoculars fragments. Luke instantly turned the gun 15 degrees to the right. Bang! 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 100 meters away, another hitman who was aiming at him dropped. Luke didn't stop there. He turned 50 degrees to the right, and a hitman on another rooftop raised his gun and aimed at him. Bang! 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 The hitman spun and dropped his gun. Luke shook his head. The man wasn't dead. Sniping really wasn't his specialty. Also, with how he switched targets so quickly, the successive shots he fired naturally wouldn't be as accurate as at close range. He shot the first hitman through a pair of binoculars. The second hitman was also shot in the face. 2 bullets hit the third hitman in the chest and shoulder, but he was still alive. Of course, if the 3 killers knew what Luke was thinking, they would probably die from anger. He had never used an August before. He hit 3 targets in 2 seconds, and in different directions. 2 of them were dead and 1 was injured, and he was still complaining that he wasn't good at shooting. Luke subconsciously assessed his abilities, and didn't waste any time. After 3 attacks, he retreated into the darkness with his gun. Several hitmen nearby had already sensed the activity and immediately approached his location. Luke didn't look up as he entered the apartment building. He murmured, "There are so many drones today." There were 5 small drones in this area, which were still feeding the hitmen his movements. Luke wasn't too surprised. His medium-sized drone was at an even higher altitude to better monitor the situation down below. Also, it was like a ghost machine which couldn't be detected with tech that had yet to reach a certain point. Since everybody has surveillance methods, let's hurt each other. Luke ran quickly and opened a window on the 2nd floor. Leaping down, he heard the sound of an SUV. The head of a hitman who was running toward the entrance of the apartment building exploded. Luke dropped to the ground and left. Behind him, the hitman collapsed, their movements were surprisingly coordinated. When the gunshots rang out, the surrounding hitmen moved even faster. They had clearly received information of his location. Luke, however, disappeared into the darkness. Elementary concealment was just that powerful. Even with the drones over their heads, the hitmen couldn't react quickly. 2 hitmen stuck their heads out from around a corner and carefully took 2 steps. Bang! 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 They were both killed. At a distance of 30 meters, an August was much better than a pistol. In the Continental Hotel, Santino frowned. What was going on with John? Why was he getting stronger? The guards at his estate were decent, but they weren't seasoned fighters, so it wasn't strange that Luke had killed dozens of them. But he had also killed 50 of the elite hitmen summoned by the high table tonight, which was a little unbelievable. Wasn't this guy heavily injured? Why was he still so strong? He looked at the short-haired girl. How is he killing so many people? Thinking for a moment, the short-haired girl signed with her hands. Seeing her gestures, Santino nodded thoughtfully. He barely showed his face, so he's indeed heavily injured. Killing his opponents with firearms is less of a burden on his body. Thinking that, Santino leaned back against the couch and sighed. It's a pity I'm not the head of the family yet, and I can't use those legendary killers. But if I don't kill him, how can I go back and take over the family head position? The short-haired girl felt helpless. That was just going around in circles. John was strong, but he wasn't the only legendary killer under the high table. The strength that John had displayed before could only be considered to be at the bottom when it came to the legendary killers. If they wanted to kill John, they could just send out a stronger legendary killer. At the high table, the only people qualified to use these super killers were the 12 members. But if he didn't kill John, Santino wouldn't be able to become one of the 12. He had told John to kill Gianna before the coronation ceremony, so John could naturally do the same to him. It could be said that he had brought it on himself. For a moment, Santino was extremely conflicted. F***ck. This matter was. After thinking for a long while, he said, support the hitmen as much as possible. It's best if we kill John tonight. The short-haired girl signed, understood, but there was great doubt in her eyes. She didn't think it was likely that she would succeed. Santino understood what she was thinking. He sighed. Even if you can't kill him, injure him heavily. At the very least, it'll give me time to complete the coronation ceremony. Luke didn't know how much anxiety he was causing Santino. He was currently on a killing spree. Compared with the covert, missing, hitmen, shooting was undoubtedly a simpler and more efficient method of killing, and was what he was best at. In his hands, the might of the August was on full display. A constant stream of hitmen flocked to him, but the moment they faced each other, he would always shoot first or hide in the dark. Each time, just as they were about to surround him, Luke would break out and jump out. Bang! 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 Luke disappeared again, and the bullets only left holes in the wall. The hitmen chased him again, but they were no longer as fearless. They advanced cautiously. A bunch of these bold and reckless hitmen were already dead. They had all been killed because they attacked too quickly. Now, 4 or 5 killers were being very cautious as they did their best to advance under cover. Luke, on the other hand, didn't hang around as he circled over to the other side. The battle had only been going on for 10 minutes, but he had already killed more than 20 people. It was enough to alarm the police. From the drones, 7 to 8 patrol cars were swiftly approaching. On the police comms, 20 ESU people had gathered and were about to set off. They would arrive in 10 minutes at most. Luke had no choice but to take the hitmen down in one go. At the end of an alley, he swung out the August in his right hand. Bang! 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 The heads of 2 hitmen who had been about to carefully turn a corner exploded, and their bodies disappeared. The view from above was blocked by all sorts of junk, so the hitmen's drones couldn't see what was happening. The fewer bodies there were, the better. That way, when Luke went to work the next day, he wouldn't get this case and have to investigate himself. As he repeatedly lured the hitmen in and ambushed them, they gradually formed a semicircle. The hitmen didn't notice. They had intelligence support, but it wasn't really comprehensive. Also, they didn't sense the danger here. If a hitman who had been killed in Swamp Park a month ago was resurrected and saw this, he would be absolutely horrified. More than 30 hitmen were lured out to form a curved firing line. If they were scattered like sesame seeds on a round biscuit, Luke wouldn't be able to clean the hitmen up quickly, but this semicircle was one curved line. As long as he followed this arc, these people were like grasshoppers on a string, and Luke would eat them all up. Now, all he needed was a suitable location. The hitmen also suddenly realized that Boogeyman John had run into a location that was too perfect for them to surround him. The rundown factory was about 30 to 40 meters wide, with only a few piles of abandoned machinery that could act as cover. After John Wick entered the factory, there was limited space for him to move around. Several snipers had the back covered, and most people started to surround the factory. Right at that moment, gunshots rang out. The sound of the 2 guns was muffled and heavy. It was the snipers at the back of the factory who had opened fire. We found him. He's trying to break out. We forced him back inside. Be careful. He's slippery, it's hard to lock onto him. Bang! 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 He's breaking out again. Tell them to hurry up, one of the snipers shouted into his comms after firing. He wasn't alone, and was part of a 4-man team. His other 3 partners were in the group of hitmen that had been forced into coming here. 10 seconds later, more than 30 people emerged from the shadows, but they were very careful and didn't dare be careless. After John appeared, they confirmed that more than 10 hitmen had died from his counterattack during the 10-minute chase. They were practically all kill shots, he didn't even give them a chance to retreat with injuries. If they wanted to live and obtain the bounty, they had to do their best not to be targeted first. To put it another way, they didn't need to be stronger than the boogeyman, they just needed to be stronger than their comrades and make fewer mistakes. That way, the boogeyman would naturally choose to kill the most rash person. Now, nobody arrogantly wanted the entire bounty for themselves. Most of the people who wanted to monopolize it had died right in front of their eyes. The 30 killers tightened their formation and advanced. Their usually steady hearts pounded. Bang! 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 Pooh! 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 2 different types of gunfire suddenly rang out in the factory. A series of bullets broke the windows of the factories at an angle. The hitmen reacted in unison. They ducked and bent low as they ran for the nearest cover. Boom! There was a loud bang, and dust suddenly exploded in a cloud in the factory. All the hitmen sweated. Was he crazy? Why was he using a stun grenade inside the factory? Wait! The hitmen with quick reflexes suddenly realized something, and their expressions changed. He's out. Boom! Boom! Another 2 explosions rang out 10 meters away from the hitmen. The explosions muffled all other noise, including their warning. Most people could only hear the 3 massive explosions. The truth was that Luke had already no longer been in the factory even before the earliest gunshots, but had been lurking on the left. He had left the August in the factory and rigged it up so that it was fixed in place and could be fired remotely. That was how it was able to fire at the same time as the MP5. Gunfire burst out from the factory, and Luke opened fire at the same time. Under the cover of gunfire, 2 silencer pistols were undetectable. The 4 hitmen on the very left were shot in the thigh and butt. With their backs to Luke or crouched as they were in the most conspicuous positions, and their bulletproof gear probably didn't extend to their legs. As the 4 gripped their behinds in pain, Luke was like a ghost as he flitted through a stretch of shadow and swiftly charged at the hitmen. The sniper at the back noticed his movements and immediately warned, "He's on your." Boom! That was when the first stun grenade had been thrown out, drowning out his shout. In his black suit, Luke looked like a special effect from a movie as he instantly appeared on the left side of the hitman's line formation. His hands moved at a normal speed and the 2 guns swung in short arcs as he fired. Almost every time he swung his arms around, he fired 2 or 3 bullets, and a similar number of hitmen collapsed around him. From a spectator's perspective, he was charging forward rapidly as his body flashed left and right in an irregular pattern. As he moved forward, he swung the guns around smoothly on both sides. There was no end to the gunshots, but the tempo was irregular. This was modified gunfighting, and could also be called a low-end version. It relied mainly on very slight movements of the wrist and forearm. Each arc was short and fast, together, they were like continuous, overlapping waves. It was suitable for people with normal physiques and keen reflexes. People like Matt and John Wick suited this modified version of gunfighting. They could use their reaction speed and skill to make up for slow hand speed. This was also what Selena had been learning. If Claire was interested in the future, she could learn it as well. As for Luke's complete version of gunfighting, where he could create arcs that were practically ghostly, that required a very strong physique, and John Wick definitely couldn't use them. Also, V had used a complete version of gunfighting in Swamp Park, so John could only use this modified version that was more focused on skill. Left, he's on the left. Two snipers with comms saw the hitmen fall like wheat being harvested, and couldn't help but warn their comrades frantically. Boom! Boom! Another 2 stun grenades exploded, drowning out their shouts. At that moment, less than 5 seconds had passed since the gunfire rang out in the factory. Gunfire and the 3 stun grenades rang out every second, which gave the hitmen no time to think. But there were still many veterans taking part in this operation. The quickest to respond raised their guns and looked around. They saw the man in the suit who was pressing forward like a flash in the dark. Left! Left! 2 veterans shouted without hesitation. They didn't waste any time. It was just a simple word, and all the peers here would understand. At the same time, they fired like crazy with their guns. Another veteran with quick reflexes didn't say anything, but threw a flash grenade in Luke's direction. Most of the hitmen hadn't turned around yet, and their backs were to the flash grenade. Thus, this flash grenade was the biggest threat to Luke as the attacker. It could effectively block his attack and disrupt his rhythm. The 2 shooters cursed inwardly, but it had to be said that they were as experienced as Luke, and they closed their eyes. This method was quite effective and might have succeeded if it was any other opponent. However, they weren't facing the real John Wick, but a weapons fanatic who had Tony Stark's skills. The lenses on Luke's face turned silver in an instant, and he didn't stop as he continued advancing. Bang! There was a light click, and blinding white light exploded, making the night even more resplendent. The dark factory floor instantly became a snow-white expanse. F***CKU. The snipers at the back of the factory cursed. They weren't prepared for the flash grenade that was suddenly thrown out. After all, they were still almost 100 meters away, and they couldn't see very far through their scope and binoculars. But their gazes were all focused on Luke's route, which was also where the flash grenade had landed. Suddenly, they were blinded. White light exploded, and the world turned dark after that. The snipers felt chills run down their spines. They were helpless now. Their eyes would only recover a little in a few minutes. It was impossible for them to fight, at most, they could only run. But as long as their comrades couldn't kill John, they had no chance of escaping. They couldn't see anything, but they heard gunshots. In just 10 seconds, however, the gunfire died down again. The battle had actually ended so quickly. The snipers could already feel the thick aura of death. A moment ago, after the flash grenade exploded in the clearing in front of the factory, Luke wasn't shocked, but delighted. Those who didn't dodge the flash grenade would be directly blinded, which was equivalent to completely losing combat ability. It would take at least 2 seconds for anyone who avoided being blinded to adapt to the dramatic change and lock onto Luke's position. All except for one person. The tactical goggles worn by the veteran who had thrown out the flash grenade also had a powerful light protection function. The moment the flash grenade exploded, the man had anticipated it, and his bullets flew right after the flash. His movements were swift, but not as precise. Luke wasn't moving at the fastest speed possible, but his movements were extremely misleading. The veteran's bullets brushed past Luke in vain, missing him by just a hair's breadth. Every time he opened fire, he felt like he would hit Luke, but Luke would always move in an unexpected way the next moment. He had fired more than 10 bullets in 2 seconds, but none of them hit Luke. Luke wove through the group of hitmen as he advanced. His hands flew, and the hitmen fell one after another. By the time the veteran got over his judgment error, it was too late. He simply pulled the trigger and fired. It was less than 10 seconds from the flash to him firing 10 bullets, but Luke didn't stop moving. Even though he was only using a modified version of close-range gunfighting, he could still fire 4 bullets every second. Furthermore, even running at a regular speed, he was now in the center of the semicircle of hitmen, and 4 or 5 hitmen were taken down at a range of 10 meters every second. In 3 seconds, he covered more than 20 meters as he moved quickly from left to right. Wherever he passed through, the hitmen would scream or be shot in the head. Whether they reacted quickly or fired, they didn't survive a shot within 10 meters. At that moment, the veteran shooter who had thrown out the flash grenade was within 10 meters of Luke. They looked at each other for a moment, and Luke smiled. The veteran was creeped out. Boogeyman John never smiled when he killed people. Pa! A bullet pierced his goggles. He was still frozen, and there was fear on his face. He had already fallen backward to collapse against the abandoned machinery behind him. He was the last person to be shot during the ambush, and the only person to witness Luke's massacre from the beginning to end. He had keen combat awareness and excellent combat skills, yet could only despair. He watched as Luke killed his peers who were restrained by his flash grenade at an unhurried pace. In the end, he watched Luke shoot him when he wasn't far away. The moment he died, he realized that Boogeyman John was far stronger than he had imagined. His defeat wasn't unjustified. The gunshots finally stopped for a brief moment. It had only been slightly more than 10 seconds since Luke's surprise attack, but the 2 Glocks in his hands were empty, and 34 hitmen had taken a bullet each. He pressed the release buttons on both guns at the same time, and 2 empty clips slipped out before he took out new clips. He reloaded the Glocks, then pointed the Glock in his right hand sideways. Pa! A hitman who was gripping his injured thigh and was about to raise his gun with the other hand was shot in the face and fell to the ground. The reloaded Glock in Luke's left hand also casually swung around. Pa! Another hitman who had been shot in the butt was shot in the neck, and he stopped struggling to get up. Then, sporadic gunshots rang out in the factory yard. Luke had reloaded to wrap things up. He had never been careless on this point. As the gunshots rang out unhurriedly, the hitmen stopped screaming and begging. In the Continental Hotel, Santino looked at the drone feed and was stunned. WTF. After a brief stupor, he suddenly stood up. That's impossible. He's already heavily injured. How is he still so strong? Wait, why isn't he crippled? F***ck, his injuries were fake. Halfway through his sentence, he realized what was going on. He had done a lot of this sort of deception himself, but had never expected John Wick to also use this move. Thinking that, his face turned blue and red with anger. The short-haired girl clapped to draw his attention, then signed again with her hands. Santino's face changed. The fraternity's gunfighting skills? That's impossible. There's no way he would join us and the fraternity at the same time. The high table doesn't allow that. The short-haired girl frowned and thought for a moment, before she signed again. Santino said, "You're saying that it's something like gunfighting, but not entirely." Saying that, he looked at the feed and replayed the video. After watching it several times, he nodded. Indeed, his speed and strength aren't as good as the fraternity's renowned assassins. It's just that his movements are too precise and quick, which is why he's so lethal. The short-haired girl nodded and signed. Santino walked back and forth. Get the fraternity to deal with him? Yes, that's possible. Those guys view their business very strictly. Tell them that John Wick has learned the fraternity's gunfighting, and even curve shooting, and they'll definitely come after him. It doesn't matter who wins or loses, it'll create an even bigger conflict. At that time, I might have a chance to go to Rome and complete the coronation ceremony. Thinking that, his eyes lit up. Let's do it. The short-haired girl coughed and signed at him. Right, someone has to clean up the bodies first. Santino nodded with an ugly expression. He took out his phone and made a call. This is Santino. Yes, Santino D'Antonio. I also have a reservation. He looked at the short-haired girl and saw her give him a number. His heart grew even heavier, but he continued, dinner for 60 to 80 people. I'll send you the address right away. You only have 1 hour. Pa. On the rooftop behind the factory, Luke put his pistol back into his holster and looked up at the sky. He gave the drones one last glance before he disappeared into the darkness. The blinded snipers on the nearby rooftops had all been shot in the head. While the hitmen had not been together, they were now all one big family in the end. Luke soon entered New York's sewers and headed north. He had left the bodies of 75 hitmen in Harlem tonight, but had no intention of cleaning up the scene. After he killed the last batch of hitmen, the ones who were still close by suddenly scattered. At the same time, the patrol cars that arrived had stopped at an intersection 500 meters and sealed off the area. According to the police radio, HQ had ordered the patrol officers to seal off the area and prevent innocent passers-by from passing through. Also, because the criminals had fierce firepower and their numbers were unknown, this matter was left to the ESU to handle. Of course, the patrol officers had no objections. Not everyone liked to charge into a gunfight, and that included the police. Compared with the ESU, the patrol officers were responsible largely for daily law and order. If they faced off against professional assailants, the number of casualties would rack up easily. At first glance, the order made sense. But at the same time, the ESU team that was on the way received another order. They were to wait until another team arrived and before the captain instructed them to enter. The result was that no police officer approached the factory zone for hundreds of meters. Thinking quickly, Luke realized that the high table had taken action. The underground world's major forces were indeed extraordinary. They could actually secretly influence NYPD's operations, and create leeway for the cleanup. Of course, it was unrealistic to say that the high table was instructing the police officers at will. It was more likely that both parties were getting what they wanted. The high table wanted to clean up the mess and make sure that there were no traces of their movements so that they wouldn't draw widespread attention. Since there was no major damage, NYPD could report that there was no evidence found for this case, and everybody would be happy. When Luke realized this, he stopped worrying about the cleanup. In the last battle in front of the factory, most of the footage of Boogeyman John killing the hitmen was captured by the drones. It was a huge pile of bodies, and the drones were still monitoring them. Naturally, Luke didn't use his inventory to make the bodies disappear into thin air. Dealing with bodies and his inventory ability were a thing. More than 20 hitmen in New Jersey had died under surveillance. Including the 75 people in Harlem, that was more than 100 victims. There were more than 40 hitmen in Luke's inventory who had been killed without anyone noticing. Thus, the number of hitmen casualties tonight was 148. Each of these hitmen gave more than 200 experience and credit points, while most of them were in the 300+ range. A small portion was worth over 400 and 500 points. The total amount of experience and credit points was no less than 61,000. At that moment, the system showed that the host's experience was 250,600/300,000. Credit, 266,600. Coupled with the first half, in Rome a few days ago, Luke had earned almost 100,000 experience and credit points from this fight for the position of head of the Kimura family. The high table was indeed a super instance. Furthermore, this was a serial instance. There was even overtime to determine a winner after the match. Santino and his bodyguards would earn Luke a lot of experience and credit points. Obtaining over 100,000 experience and credit points from one instance usually took a while and rarely happened. Currently, he was close to obtaining enough points to level up to level 18, but would he be able to earn from the high table the 500,000 points required for level 19 as well? Luke calculated happily in his heart as he found an exit and crawled out. After walking dozens of meters, he entered a safe house, changed his clothes, and got rid of the smell on his body. He then drove back to the lab. In the New York Continental Hotel, Winston finished going through the video which Sharon had brought him. After a long moment, he said, "Keep an eye on Santino's movements. Let me know as soon as he leaves the hotel." Sharon said, "Yes, sir." After that, he didn't leave. After a brief hesitation, he asked softly, "Is it all right for us to intervene?" Winston took a sip of his black tea. "Santino is staying at my hotel. Can I stay out of it?" Sharon said, "If he becomes the head of the family, Mr. Wick." Winston thought for a moment, then shook his head with a low laugh. A few days ago, Gianna was going to become the head of the family. Isn't she now lying in a funeral home? Sharon, what do you mean? Winston took another sip of his black tea. Nothing. Santino wants to tell me what to do. We'll revisit that only after he becomes one of the 12. Now, he's just the young master of the Kimura family. Sharon didn't say anything else and quickly left. When the room fell silent once more, Winston picked up the tablet again and looked at John, who was slaughtering people like dogs. His eyes flickered. "Jonathan, you really are a genius. You were born for this." The weather was good the next day. All was calm in New York. NYPD had made a big move last night, but hadn't found anything. The official conclusion was that there had been a gang fight in Harlem, but the police had reacted quickly and the gang members fled. There were no casualties at the scene. Citizens could rest assured, NYPD was confident they could protect everyone's personal property. Luke and Selena could only smile at that. Everything was fine. Thanks to the hard work of the NYPD big shots, there was no new pressure on the police department. Luke went to the police department on his own today before he left for his place in Clinton. Selena didn't go out in the morning, and went shopping with Gold Nugget in the afternoon. This was Luke's new assignment for her, for the two of them to move independently until it became a regular thing. When Luke returned at noon, he dropped in on the law firm. He happened to see Matt take a bus and leave. When he reached the office and closed the door, he asked Foggy, "What's wrong with Matt? He looks like he's in a rush." Foggy pushed the files on his desk away and gave a long sigh. He looked in Karen's direction outside the office and said, "It's nothing. He has a personal matter to deal with." Luke's mental communication was maturing day by day, and he asked casually, "What? Someone's fighting with Karen over Matt?" Foggy looked at him in surprise. "How did you know?" Luke chuckled. "That's because you looked at Karen the moment you spoke, so I guessed it was a relationship thing." Foggy shook his head with a bitter smile. "In any case, it's a little troublesome. The woman is an old acquaintance of Matt's." "I can't say anything." Luke nodded. "True. You also have an old acquaintance like that, you definitely understand Matt's predicament." Foggy was truly horrified this time. **T. You investigated me?" Luke curled his lip. "You're overthinking it. Otherwise, how can you explain the smell of perfume on your clothes, unless you have a special hobby? This perfume isn't cheap. A lot of career women like this one. Let me guess, she should be around your age, or even slightly older, and she's the one who took the initiative." Foggy trembled and looked like he was about to curl into a ball in his chair. "Are you a demon?" Luke said, "So, it's best to take a shower and change your clothes after you're out fooling around, or you might draw unwanted attention." Forget it. In any case, you only have this one good female friend. There's no way you can be like Matt and two-time someone. Foggy couldn't look at him anymore. "You can even guess the number." He didn't really think that Luke had privately investigated him, there was no need to. Conversely, he had asked around about Luke and Selena. They had a good reputation in the police department and were good at cracking cases. Foggy had indeed gotten involved with his ex-girlfriend last night, and had come straight to work in the morning. He could smell his ex-girlfriend's perfume on his clothes. It wasn't hard to guess the truth, but most people wouldn't dwell on it. After joking around, they finally got down to business. The first matter had to do with Matt's ex, who was a rich lady who had not long ago written them a huge check for Matt to handle a case for her. But thanks to the charity fund which Luke had set up, the law firm had money coming in every month. While they couldn't be considered wealthy, the three of them wouldn't starve at least. Matt had very adamantly returned the check. Naturally, Foggy didn't know what Matt's ex had wanted. Secondly, the new real estate developer in the Clinton area had finished buying up most of the houses and the residents had relocated, while the construction team had already set up camp. Luke found that odd. Why is the construction team going in? Foggy scratched his head. I think there's something strange about it too. There are a dozen more families they still have to finish negotiations with. They can't tear down the building directly, but they also can't refurbish or whatever and then rent it out. There's no way they can raise the rent either, the only thing they can push for is reconstruction. The construction team did go in and there's activity every day, but nobody has seen what they're doing. Luke nodded. I'll have my colleagues check the files at the Department of Housing and see what this construction project is about. Foggy was relieved, he had the same idea. Their suspicions had to be confirmed first. The construction team had sealed off the construction site, which could only be entered through one door. Foggy couldn't sneak in and take a look even if he wanted to. He had wanted to discuss it with Matt, but Matt had been preoccupied with his ex-girlfriend lately, and the atmosphere in the office was strange with Karen. He hadn't had the chance to say anything. Foggy could only look for Luke. After that, Luke got up and left. When he went downstairs, he couldn't help but mumble to himself, no wonder the lawyer has been so angry recently. So it's between his ex-girlfriend and his current girlfriend, he. Thinking that, Luke didn't dwell on it. When it came to matters of the heart, even the best friend shouldn't get involved. Although he had a better impression of Karen, who on earth knew what Matt was thinking? In any case, Matt wasn't married. After Luke returned home, he got dinner cooking in the smart kitchenware before he went back to work in the basement. The Thousand Faces system was still missing the torso. Given his slight OCD, he still wanted to make it. It didn't need to be perfect, but the basic functions had to be realized. Compared with the mask, the torso of the Thousand Faces system required more skill. No matter how the face was modified, it only required very minute adjustments, but a body's distinctive characteristics had to be transformed, including the most troublesome thing, which was its height. Shrinking a body down was very hard, but making a body taller was no mean feat either. Purely padding the bottom of the feet or making the armor longer would still be very easily exposed with the rapid progress in technology. Tony Stark, for one, could easily see through this sort of low-level disguise with a simple command to his AI program. After all, the external appearance could be altered slightly, but there was no way to adjust the joints. Even if a height difference of 10 centimeters could be closed with taller shoes, the way strength was exerted wasn't the same. By the same logic, individuals with a 5 centimeters difference in arm length would adopt different combat methods. Things like body proportions and center of gravity could also affect the body. That was also why Luke had always liked to make bigger sets of battle armor that was more than 5 centimeters thick completely hid these sorts of things. It was impossible to tell from the outside whether the user was 1.6 meters or 1.8 meters tall in a suit of armor that was 2 meters tall. The Thousand Faces system, on the other hand, used nanotechnology, and a high level was required to achieve the morph and disguise effect. But this system was one of the things that Luke had to develop. He would have a matching ability to replace it sooner or later, but he could give the Thousand Faces system to his allies so that they could hide their identities. It was very risky to act like a hero, and Luke had to stay low. With the Thousand Faces system, the only people in the world who would know his real identity were himself and Selena, HM, and maybe one dog. In the Continental Hotel, Santino didn't look too good as he sent off the special envoy from the fraternity. Only part of his plan had worked. The fraternity had agreed to send 2 elite hitmen to deal with John, but Santino had to use himself as bait. Secondly, Santino had to first pay the fraternity $10 million, which was separate to the bounty. In the end, the two elite hitmen weren't his bodyguards. They would only hide around Santino and wait for John to appear. Also, they only had 3 days. Not only did Santino have to lure out John in 3 days, he also had to work hard to survive until they took action. In the end, he still had to rely on his bodyguards to withstand John's first attack. Santino wasn't satisfied with this outcome. But the fraternity was very firm, their attitude made it clear that they had no intention of taking over. Santino had also received some private information that the fraternity had run into a lot of problems in the last 6 months. It seemed many members had died, and they had no time to care about Santino. Perhaps that was the reason why the fraternity wasn't keen on taking this assignment. So, they were just giving it a try. In any case, Santino was the bait, and they just needed to kill the target. According to the rules, even if Santino, their client, was killed by Boogeyman John, it wouldn't impact on the people of the fraternity receiving the reward. The $10 million deposit they had asked for was ample proof. Whether they got cold feet or failed the mission, the two elite hitmen each got $5 million. For elite hitmen, this price was quite tempting. Looking at the anxious Santino, the short-haired girl coughed, and signed when he looked at her. Santino frowned and pondered. A body double? John won't fall for it that easily. The short-haired girl signed again. Santino pondered for a moment. Switching out halfway? They could consider doing that. Currently, John wouldn't appear unless Santino went out. John was on his own, even his wife was gone. He had plenty of time to keep an eye on Santino, a month or even a year wouldn't make a difference. The elite assassins of the fraternity weren't small fry, but super big shots. If Santino didn't lure out the boogeyman in 3 days, they would abandon this mission without any hesitation. Santino had to solve the problem in New York. Otherwise, even if he flew back to Rome, he would have to be careful of any assassination attempts on John's part. Even worse, many people in Rome were loyal to his sister, Gianna. Many had even heard that he had hired someone to assassinate her. When they saw John, they might let him in. Didn't you have John kill your own sister? Then just let John kill you too. You reap what you sow, and everyone will be happy. It was safer in New York. Santino had been operating in this territory for a long time, and his subordinates were all loyal. He quickly made up his mind, and said to the short-haired girl, "Come up with a plan, and tomorrow, get the private plane ready. When the time comes, have the body double board the plane and see if you can lure John out." The short-haired girl nodded and signed that she understood, before she went off to prepare. Santino was right. If he dared to fly back to Rome, Luke would definitely go after him with an express delivery. And Gianna, currently deceased, would generously open the doors wide for Luke, hastening Santino's death. Luke didn't know about Santino's zeal, but in the blink of an eye, he found 2 acquaintances to be his opponents. He had simply set up surveillance cameras around the Continental Hotel to track Santino's movements. In any case, he wasn't scared that this guy would run back to Rome to die. New York was peaceful and quiet, and Luke and Selena went about their business as usual. 2 nights after the Battle of Harlem, Santino, who had been hiding in the Continental Hotel, finally came out. Luke, who was having dinner, wasn't in a hurry. He checked the surveillance feed and looked at Selena. Selena had her hair up in a ponytail to prevent it falling into her noodle soup. She noticed Luke's expression and found it strange. "What? Do you want me to kill him?" Luke was amused. Selena really wasn't shooting off her mouth. She could easily crush Santino's bodyguards now in the second-generation beast armor. If she combined with Gold Nugget, that would be unnecessary. The dog head might eat and watch TV every day, but the combat ability of its and Selena's complete form was off the charts. With enough imagination, Selena's body could morph significantly. With a thought, she could wield anything from a whip, net, rod, hammer, or spike to even tentacles. Coupled with Luke's high-tech equipment, it was easy for her to kill a bunch of professional mercenaries or assassins in 10 seconds. However, Selena only activated the symbiotic form when she was in the training room, in order to hone her physique. She barely used it when she went out on an operation. Luke said, "Santino's out. If this guy gets onto a plane, it'll be hard for you." Selena said, "I get it, you want me to flash your face at a few suitable surveillance cameras, right?" Luke nodded. "Yes." Selena waved her hand. "Go, go." Luke said, "After we've finished the noodles. It's rare that I make them." Selena thought that made sense. Luke had specially made these simple noodles for her and the dog head today. It was a rare occasion, so finishing them in peace was a good idea. Luke finished his noodles leisurely and put on John Wick's face, before he put on his stealth suit and set off via the underground passage. Santino didn't go straight to the airport. Instead, he went to a dinner party at the D'Antonio family's private museum in New York to mourn the death of his sister, Gianna. Luke could only chuckle at the party. Santino didn't have that deep a bond with his sister. The museum party was definitely a trap to lure out Boogeyman John. But so what? This was nothing more than the stage for mutual harm. The D'Antonio family's museum was on the Upper East Side in Manhattan. Luke didn't even need to drive. He simply walked a kilometer through the sewers and emerged not far from the museum. The drone rose into the air and captured the guests entering the museum. There were around 50 bodyguards in and outside the museum. Looking at the number of people, Luke couldn't help but shake his head. What a poor setup, who did they think they were fooling? These bodyguards weren't on the same level as the hitmen from last night. Wanting to rely on this number of people to obstruct the boogeyman was absolutely ridiculous. This was without doubt a trap, so Luke naturally had to check it out. But not right now. Luke's gaze shifted to a certain unit in a building not far away. He couldn't see them, but he had detected two people with his sharp nose. It wasn't unusual that they were carrying guns, but they also carried another scent, the smell of the fraternity's medicinal bath. This thing had been on Luke's mind for a long time, and he had tried putting it together many times. Even if it was just a trace, he could instantly pick out the smell. The fact that hitmen from the fraternity, who were qualified to use the medicinal bath, had appeared at this time and place meant that they were definitely important members of the organization. "Night Wolf, have you ever thought of retiring?" a Caucasian woman asked the African-American man next to her. The man, Night Wolf, was still looking at the museum 100 meters away. "Why? Also, do you think Sloan will let us leave right now?" "Don't think too much, White Dove. You might get yourself killed." White Dove smiled bitterly. "Scarface is dead, Redback's gone, X is missing, and Water Buffalo is dead. Cross is hunting us down one by one. We were lucky we were only injured this time, but we might not be able to survive next time. I would rather leave beforehand like Redback, we might still be able to survive that way." After a brief silence, Night Wolf shook his head. "Then? Where would we go? We don't know how to do anything except kill people. Also, do you think the High Table will let people like us escape their control?" White Dove said, "We're rich. We at least managed to get 10 million this time. Where can't we go?" Night Wolf didn't say anything. White Dove looked at him in disappointment. She understood that Night Wolf was already used to this life, and subconsciously resisted change. Of course, it was more likely that he was afraid of the fraternity and the High Table. But the danger was now right in front of them. Who knew when Cross would have them in his sights? If they stayed any longer, they might no longer have a chance. Dead people didn't have any. But since Night Wolf didn't seem to want to talk about it, she stopped. After this mission was over and they obtained the money, it might be easier to discuss their future then. That was what she thought. People from the fraternity. Suddenly, a voice rang out behind them. They took out their guns without hesitation. Bang! Bang! The bullets hit the wall next to the door, but the door was wide open and there was nobody there. Both of them turned grim. An expert. Let's not be hasty. The voice rang out again from the empty doorway. Tell me why you're here. I think you're here to kill me. 10 million, right? Night Wolf's expression hardened. John Wick? Hee hee. There was no humor in that low laugh, the tone didn't change at all. Seems like it's the case. Your fraternity can't even take care of itself, and you actually dare stick your nose into my matter. They didn't say anything, but looked around, ready to flee the room. I'll give you a chance. The person continued, call Sloan and tell him that this is only the once, or the fraternity will be my enemy. White Dove snorted coldly. There's no need. The person said, yes, there is. As long as you do it, you just need to dodge my bullets, and I won't hunt you down. Their hearts turned heavy. The person had said a lot, but they weren't able to locate him. The enemy was in the dark, and they were in a disadvantageous position. After a brief silence, Night Wolf suddenly said, White Dove, make the call. Without any hesitation, White Dove slowly took out her phone and called Sloan, and repeated John Wick's threat. This wasn't a sign of weakness, but to spread word of their encounter with Boogeyman John. Very good. You bought yourself one last chance. After White Dove hung up, the voice continued, now, I'm going to attack. Night Wolf and White Dove immediately reacted. The tall and strong Night Wolf's heart raced, and he activated physical outburst. He charged out of the room and into the hallway. White Dove was right behind him. Both of them had guns in their hands, which boosted their confidence. There was nobody in the dimly lit corridor. Night Wolf immediately broke into a run, his pistol in his right hand, while White Dove covered him on the left. You want to leave? It's too late. The voice rang out again, and they felt extremely uncomfortable. It felt like they were fighting a ghost. Even Night Wolf's attention couldn't help but shift to the room behind him. Then, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. The next moment, he realized that someone had grabbed his gun. A person in a black close-fitting outfit appeared in front of him, as if he had appeared out of thin air. When his attention had shifted earlier and he subconsciously looked behind him, a person suddenly appeared in his peripheral vision. As a veteran assassin, he naturally sensed something was wrong. Night Wolf reacted very quickly. Thanks to physical outburst, he had extraordinary strength and reflexes, and he pulled the trigger without hesitation. At that moment, he felt a pain in his finger and his vision turned blurry. He couldn't pull the trigger as his finger was instantly bent in the opposite direction. Before he could cry out in pain, a hand stretched out like a snake and a knife stabbed into his throat. With a crack, Night Wolf's throat broke. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the man in black pass under his right armpit. White Dove was in danger. Night Wolf wanted to shout, but he couldn't make a sound at all. He could only do his best to turn around and punch him in the back with his right fist. As soon as his right arm started to move, Luke's right hand, which had pulled away, punched the back of Night Wolf's head. Night Wolf was instantly stunned. A moment later, blood slowly flowed out of his eyes, nose, mouth and ears. Sensing the danger, White Dove's heart sped up as she activated physical outburst. Crack! Crack! She felt excruciating pain in her shoulders as her arms dangled lifelessly, they had been dislocated after 2 punches. Luke then grabbed White Dove by the throat and pushed her against the wall. White Dove wanted to yell, but she could barely breathe. The hand around her neck completely controlled her voice and breathing. Then, someone whispered in her ear, "Tell me, who sent you after me?" Sensing the grip on her neck relax a little, White Dove gritted her teeth and asked, "Who are you?" She had heard of Boogeyman John, but he wasn't strong enough to kill her and Night Wolf instantly. She suspected that she had run into another expert. John Wick. Some call me the boogeyman. The person was still calm. Tell me, who sent you to kill me? White Dove's mind whirled as she tried to find an opportunity to counterattack so that she and Night Wolf could live. In the next moment, she simply replied, Santino D'Antonio. She was stunned the moment she said it. The person behind her didn't stop. Are you from the fraternity? Yes, replied White Dove. She was suddenly frightened. You can control my mind. Otherwise, her mouth wouldn't be running itself ragged before she could even figure out how to answer. Luke smiled. Hee, this pheromone control is even more terrifying than mind control, lady. A despairing White Dove was carried back into the room, and the interrogation lasted 5 minutes. But apart from the initial question about the commission being from Santino, the subsequent questions were all about the fraternity's current situation. She had a bad feeling. Was this boogeyman planning on attacking the fraternity? Unfortunately, even if she knew that, she could only obediently confess everything. After asking for the information he wanted, Luke asked one last question. How many innocent people have you killed? White Dove was very reluctant to answer, but still did so honestly. I don't know. Maybe 5 or 6, maybe 7 or 8. I don't know if these people were guilty, but Sloane gave me a list and said that it was fate. Luke said, so, the loom is just an excuse. You actually knew that these people didn't necessarily have to die, right? White Dove said despairingly, yes. I know a few of them had never committed any crimes, but Sloane said that they would become evil in the future, so I killed them. Luke nodded. Any last words? A thought occurred to White Dove. You said you would let us go as long as we dodged your bullets. Pondering for a moment, Luke shook his head regretfully. I've always been a man of my word, but you fell before I could even shoot. You can only blame yourselves for being too weak. White Dove was full of despair. You liar, D*MNY. Crack. Drawing his fist back, Luke looked at the woman's drooping head and sighed. Bad guys don't have the right to make demands. A moment later, White Dove disappeared, and the scene was tidied up. As for Night Wolf, Luke had killed him in the hallway with one punch a few minutes ago. When Luke had escorted White Dove into the room to be interrogated, he had stored Night Wolf's body away in Space One. Everything had been wrapped up. Let them go. No way. White Dove had been well aware that she was willfully killing the innocent, but she still followed Sloane's instructions and killed at will. Whether man or woman, someone like that deserved to die. It hadn't taken more than 10 minutes to deal with this foreign aid. The guards at the museum 100 meters away didn't hear the gunshots. The party had only just started. Luke entered the museum from the back and walked into the front hall. That was the main venue for the party, and most of the guests were there. Santino should be there too. But when Luke walked down a corridor at the back of the museum, he was stumped for a moment. He looked at a side corridor, then immediately switched directions and walked over. Half a minute later, he was looking at a bright silver blast-proof door under the surveillance camera, and was amused. Interesting. Santino, you're quite good at making escape plans. Staying invisible, he placed a decoder on the combination lock of the blast-proof door, and a string of data flashed on the decoder. In less than 30 seconds, a green indicator lit up on the combination lock, and it opened silently. Luke put the decoder away and jumped lightly. 5 seconds later, the door was completely open. 7 or 8 bodyguards looked nervously at the doorway, only to find it empty. It was a straight passage that was about the same size as the door for over 10 meters on the other side, and there were no blind spots, there was no place for anyone to hide. The leader of the bodyguards picked up the walkie-talkie and said, "Boss, there's nobody outside." The walkie-talkie was silent for a moment, before Santino said, "Got it. F***CK, what kind of lousy door is this? After this is over, I'm going to sue for insurance until the company goes bankrupt. Nobody noticed that when the door slowly opened, a warped, transparent shadow had snuck in and was hanging from the ceiling like a spider. It then landed quietly behind the bodyguards. This was an underground living area that was more than 200 square meters in size. The door opened into a large hall, which was where all the bodyguards were. Further in was a sitting room and several rooms. There were two very distinctive scents, Santino and his short-haired female bodyguard. But Luke didn't go after them right away. He stood in one corner of the sitting room for a moment and let his sharp nose fully investigate the underground space. Sure enough, apart from the blast-proof door, there was another security passage in Santino's bedroom. Luke then made a beeline for the surveillance room. This was the key to keeping an eye on this basement and alerting the bodyguards. When he had snuck in just now, the optical camouflage would definitely have still caused some abnormality. If they had been more attentive, they might have noticed that something wasn't right. Of course, it didn't matter if they did. Santino had to die. But how much Luke could squeeze out of him before he died would depend on how well the operation went. It turned out that even members of a major underworld force like the Kimura weren't much better than a regular company, especially when it came to surveillance. They couldn't help but slack off. Staring at a fixed surveillance feed for long periods to detect anything suspicious wasn't something a human being could do. AI programs were more suitable for surveillance than people, and this underground living space clearly didn't have any such advanced technology. Luke didn't even have to get too close. He simply took out a tranquilizer gun and shot the 4 bodyguards who were watching the surveillance feed. After checking the surveillance equipment and making sure that there was no wireless communication or external storage, he turned it off and left. Then, he stealthily shot the bodyguards in the hall as well, instantly paralyzing them. Did Santino and Ares notice something? No. They were in one of the rooms. How could they hang around with the bodyguards and lackeys? As someone who didn't lack money, Santino's room was naturally soundproof, and the sound of the tranquilizer gun couldn't be heard at all. After that, Luke returned to the surveillance room and dismantled the hard drive that contained the surveillance footage. He used the decoder again. When he opened the door of Santino's room, the 2 people inside looked at him in surprise. At that moment, Luke had put away his stealth suit. When he stepped into the room in his signature black suit and slicked back hair, the expressions of Santino and the short-haired female bodyguard froze, then changed dramatically. There was pure terror on Santino's face, but the short-haired girl swiftly reached for her gun. That was the difference between the boss behind the scenes and the soldiers. Pa! The short-haired girl's right shoulder jerked, and a bullet hole appeared. The gun she had just drawn dropped to the ground. She staggered, but determination flashed in her eyes. Brushing her left hand over her waist, she held a thin blade between her fingers before she charged at Luke. As calm as ever, Luke lowered his gun and stepped forward unhurriedly. The short-haired girl let out a short laugh and thrust the blade at Luke's chest. Luke raised his left hand, as if to block it. The short-haired girl changed direction and aimed at his arm. But Luke was a little faster. His fist unfurled below her wrist. He then curled his fingers around her left arm and brushed past her. The short-haired girl couldn't help but fall back. Crack. There was a slight crack, and the short-haired girl's left arm was dislocated. The blade dropped to the ground. "Stand still and don't move," he ordered as he let go of her arm. The short-haired girl glared at him fiercely and was about to charge forward, when she realized that her body seemed to have a mind of its own, and she was rooted to the spot. Her expression changed, and there was fear. She was a mute. Since she couldn't move, she couldn't even warn Santino. Actually, it was useless even if she could warn him. Santino hadn't even realized his goal of becoming a boss behind the scenes, much less a hidden big boss. He was just slightly stronger than an ordinary man. Luke didn't waste any time. He raised his hand and fired a tranquilizer, and Santino collapsed. Turning to look at the short-haired girl, who was glaring at him, he smiled. "Now, tell me your plan." In the museum's reception hall, everybody drank and laughed. Although the young Master Santino had said earlier, "For my sister," the guests here didn't show any sorrow, and the hall was filled with a cheerful atmosphere. All of them basically knew that Santino's sister was dead, and that it would be the young master who would inherit Kimura in a few days. This was undoubtedly a joyous occasion, which was why this young master had called for everyone to celebrate together. However, after this young Master Santino gave a simple toast, he stood to the side with a faint smile. Apart from exchanging polite greetings with the guests who came to talk to him, he had no intention of joining the party. Like a spectator, he glanced at the various hallways every now and then. In addition to 2 female attendants, there were 4 bodyguards next to him. They also looked at the hallways from time to time. So, when a man in a black suit and with slicked back hair appeared 10 meters away and looked calmly at Santino, the bodyguards were all stunned. They hadn't seen him just now. It was as if this person had been revealed among the guests between one blink and the next. Elementary concealment was very useful. The corners of Santino's mouth twitched, and he gritted his teeth and said softly, "John Wick." His voice shook slightly with fear, but there was no anger on his face. "Not a great actor." Luke shook his head. At that moment, the bodyguards behind Santino came back to their senses. They took out their guns and shouted, "He's here." Luke drew his pistol as quick as lightning. Bang! 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 Even John Wick's speed was enough for a shootout within a range of 10 meters. The 4 bodyguards had barely pulled their guns out, when they collapsed. The gunshots startled everyone, and they subconsciously scattered. Santino was mixed up in the crowd as he ran toward the back door, praying, don't hit me, I'm just a fake." However, except for the incessant gunfire behind him, none of the bullets hit him when he ran out of the hall with the crowd. Luke wasn't in a hurry at all. That Santino was just a stand-in. Luke would only earn 1 or 2 bodyguards worth of experience and credit points at most. If he killed all of them right away, the bodyguards might scatter. In the past, they would have still worried about how the Kimura family would deal with them in the aftermath. However, Santino had already killed his sister, Gianna, and if he died, the bodyguards wouldn't have anything to worry about anymore. Rats abandon a sinking ship, that was how things worked. The bodyguards here didn't know about the stand-in Santino. They thought that the fleeing Santino was the real one. Hearing the stand-in give the order, they could only charge into the reception hall one after another to try and eliminate the hitman. Hiding behind a marble statue of a lion that was chipped by the bullets, Luke reloaded his gun unhurriedly. He then stuffed a box into a hollow in the lion's belly. At that moment, 4 bodyguards surrounded him from both sides. When the first person on the left appeared, Luke had just finished reloading, and he switched the gun to his left hand. Pa! The head that was 5 meters away jerked before the man collapsed like a broken sack. Luke switched the gun to his right hand. Pa! Blood splattered where a right leg was half exposed, and a bodyguard screamed as he clutched his leg, exposing himself. Pa! The injured bodyguard was also shot in the head and killed. Luke moved the gun to the front. Pa! Pa! 2 bodyguards wearing the white waiter's uniform, who charged out from a hallway in the back, screamed and spun neatly in the air before they crashed to the ground. Luke turned around so that he was facing the marble lion. Swiftly running backward, the gun moved left and right. Pa! 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 The first 2 shots hit 2 bodyguards, 1 on each side, in the chest, and the next 2 shots hit them in the head. Before the gunfire died down, Luke had already reloaded his gun. It took less than a second. Bending slightly, Luke turned around and moved past the 2 waiters in white who had just fallen, and he fired twice more. Pa! Pa! They immediately stopped screaming, and for the time being, the reception hall was silent once more. At that moment, the fake Santino had just run to the back door with several guests behind him. In the hall earlier, everyone had been smiling as they praised each other. They shoved one another now, afraid that they would be shot if they were too slow. A Bentley was already waiting at the back door. The bodyguards at the back door covered Santino as they made their way to the Bentley. In the end, 5 guests suddenly burst forward. Taking advantage of the brief moment when Santino and the bodyguards met up, they opened the car doors and crammed into the Bentley. "Drive! Drive!" a fatty roared. "Who are you? Get the hell out of here!" The driver was dumbfounded. "This is Mr. D'Antonio's car." The fatty was angry. "Do you want to die? Boogeyman John is coming. He's killed everyone inside. If you let Santino in here, the first person the boogeyman will kill is you." The driver's heart trembled, but he still didn't dare drive. "Before Sir arrives, I can't start the car." The fake Santino rushed over in a panic. "Get out, you be asterisk stards. Do you want to die?" It was the fatty who spoke first. He said in the loudest voice, "Santino, we're partners. Don't get us involved in your own matter. Take the car at the back. Don't cause us trouble. WTF. The fake Santino was furious, but he could only wave at the Audi that was driving over. He had no time to bother with these people. Boogeyman John had already appeared and was slaughtering them. He wasn't the real Santino. He didn't care about reputation, and it wasn't a big deal for him to escape in the bodyguard's car. Finally, he got into the bodyguard's Audi and sped away. Only then did the driver of Santino's Bentley helplessly start the car, and was about to follow the Audi. A dark shadow suddenly darted in front of the car, and the driver's hands froze. The man in a black suit and slicked back hair was holding a pistol. He turned to the side and looked in the direction that the fake Santino had escaped. Then, he glanced at the driver and raised his gun. "Get out, or all of you will die." Boom! The 5 men in the back seat crawled out, pissing their pants. They didn't dare hide. Boogeyman John would have no qualms killing them all in the back seat. They could only hope that Boogeyman John didn't dwell on small fry like them. The driver was only half a second behind them. He opened the door and stepped back as soon as he got out. "This way, Mr. Wick. This way, please. The gas tank is full." The people in the back seat were also enlightened, and they nodded and bowed. "Mr. Wick, this way, we won't waste any more of your time." Luke still had his poker face on. He didn't even bother to look at them. He simply got into the driver's seat and said coldly, "Close the back doors." The people on both sides quickly slammed the back doors shut. Bang! Bang! After the back doors were shut, Luke hit the gas pedal and the car sped away. The 5 guests and 1 driver trembled. They bowed with raised heads, and only after the car lights disappeared into the night did they heave sighs of relief. It wasn't until then that everybody realized that the cold sweat on their foreheads and backs had turned into warm sweat that gushed out. Too scary. The fatty took out a handkerchief and wiped his forehead and face frantically. "It's a good thing I was smart enough not to let Santino get in. Otherwise, the boogeyman wouldn't have said anything, and would have definitely killed us in the car." Everybody couldn't help but nod in agreement. Scared for a moment, the fatty suddenly came back to himself. "I wonder what's up ahead. Should we take a look? Our cars are still in the underground parking lot." Everybody exchanged looks, and realized that the fatty wasn't wrong. In any case, the boogeyman had just left, and he probably wouldn't come back so soon. They didn't have cars, and couldn't run fast. They might as well go back and get their cars, and get out of here. None of them was stupid. Based on what happened just now, everybody realized that this was personal. The boogeyman hadn't even bothered to say anything to them, there was no need for them to block the gun for Santino. The head of the Kimura family? If he died, he was nothing. On the other side, while the car was moving quickly, Luke was only using 50% of elementary driving and was very relaxed. The escape of the fake Santino wasn't too important. The important thing was that people had seen the boogeyman hunt Santino down, and when Santino appeared, he would be dead. Now, the real Santino was lying inside Luke's space too. After the remains of the destroyer were absorbed, this separate space had been added to his inventory. The first person to be stuffed into space 2 was John Wick. The second person to be stuffed in it was Santino, who wanted to kill John Wick. Fate worked in strange ways. But John could live, while Santino had to die. Mulling over the operation just now, Luke took out his phone and dialed a number. "It's me, John Wick. I want to make a dinner reservation for 52 people. The address is the D'Antonio Museum. The fee is on the marble lion in the exhibition hall." After the call, he smacked his lips. No wonder those hitmen find it hard to leave the high table. Everything is taken care of, and they just need to focus on killing. Before carrying out a mission, they could get equipment and intelligence from the high table's service providers. After completing the mission, someone would clean up after them. Even Luke couldn't say that he had it easier than these hitmen. He had to gather intelligence himself and make his own equipment. Even if he had an inventory space while cleaning up, he couldn't reveal its existence. It was far less convenient than giving a cleaning company a call. After that, there would be even less chances of the police poking their nose into things. This was an unspoken rule between the underworld and regular society. The gang wars in the underworld were completely separate from the common masses and had no impact on regular society. Sighing, Luke made a second call. "Santino is dead. Do you need his body?" After a long silence, the person on the other end said, "If it's possible, leave it intact. As his older sister, I should at least give him a decent funeral." Luke said, "Okay, have your men pick up the goods at the designated location tomorrow." He hung up and shook his head. These siblings were really awkward. If they really were that close, why didn't they do anything earlier? Fine, the Kimura family's influence was enough to make most people take action. It wasn't about the money, but the huge power they wielded in the underworld. As he pondered, Luke sped up and swung the car around to hit the Audi. The Audi instantly rolled a few times before it finally stopped in the shrubs by the river. In comparison, Luke's Bentley just slowed to a stop after the fierce collision. It had to be said that a luxury car was great. The impact only dented the passenger side a little. He then slowly drove over to the Audi that had flipped over. He got out of the car and dragged the men with bloody faces out before throwing them into the back seat of the Bentley. The car soon disappeared into the night. In the New York Continental Hotel, Winston looked at Sharon in horror. "What did you say?" There was a bitter smile on Karen's usually calm face. Just now, Mr. Wick entered the D'Antonio Museum on his own and killed 52 of Santino's bodyguards. Santino himself fled with 4 bodyguards, but the wrecked car was discovered next to the Hudson River with no one in it. According to surveillance on the streets, Mr. Wick entered the area in a Bentley, but nobody saw him grab Santino. Winston frowned and immediately took out his phone to make a call. "Jonathan, you better not have killed Santino." After a brief silence, a voice rang out. "But he wanted to kill me." Winston's head throbbed. But he was going to be the head of the family soon. The other end of the line, "That's why I didn't want to wait until he became a member of the high table before taking action." Right, he also found 2 elite assassins from the fraternity, Night Wolf and White Dove, tonight. "Winston, please help me tell Sloane that this isn't over." He then hung up. Looking at his expression, Sharon asked, "What's wrong, sir?" Winston heaved a sigh. "Santino hired 2 assassins from the fraternity to ambush Jonathan. He told me to tell the fraternity to wait for his revenge." Karen's eyes widened. "What? Winston slapped his forehead. Tarasov, Kimura, and the fraternity. He's already pissed off 3 major members of the High Table. Is he trying to kill all of them? Sharon was lost for words. The Tarasov family had provoked John, and there was no helping that. After Vigo Tarasov died, his brother became the head of the family. It was said that this new head of the Tarasov family had barely become one of the 12 members of the High Table, when John killed him in his private office. After putting down the gun in front of him and toasting the other party, John left. After that, this became hearsay. The new head of the Tarasov family had firmly denied events previously, and insisted that his brother Vigo had died of a brain hemorrhage caused by high blood pressure. Even Winston couldn't help but curse when he heard the news. Your brother Vigo's brain hemorrhage was probably from his head being blown up, right? Less than 2 days after the incident, John went off to kill Gianna, the heir of the Kimura family. Reportedly, he caused another brain hemorrhage. Now, Santino, the second in line, would probably die from a brain hemorrhage. Winston smiled bitterly. Listening as the call was cut off, he finally gave up. Boogeyman John wasn't one to listen to others. He was simple, crude, and direct. He killed all his enemies. This was how the boogeyman did things. And Santino had made himself the boogeyman's enemy. A vain young man who courted death. Santino, you're too young. Winston couldn't help but feel a little schadenfreude. Santino's base of operations was in New York, but he wasn't someone who respected the elderly. Did he really think that Winston wanted him alive? Winston just didn't want John to be the one to take action. Of course, only John would dare to be so relentless. North Bergen, number 17 Textile Mill. Sloane put down the phone with a dark expression and looked at the people in the office. Night Wolf and White Dove are dead. John Wick killed them and had Winston pass a message. It seems that he's coming after us. The people in front of him frowned. Looking at everybody's expressions, Sloane's gaze fell on a wild and lovely woman who wore an indifferent expression. Firefox, what do you think? Firefox shook her head indifferently. I've heard of this man, the boogeyman. If we go up against him, there's a 50-50 chance of winning. It wouldn't be strange if either one of us is killed. But how was he able to kill Night Wolf and White Dove on his own? Everybody's expressions turned even more unsightly. This was in fact already a very good explanation. Before, they had felt that in a one-on-one fight, the chance of a well-known hitman from the fraternity winning against the boogeyman was around 60 to 80%. But it was the boogeyman who had killed 2 of their people in a 1v2, and he even dared to send word to the fraternity that it wasn't over. This meant that John, the boogeyman, had probably won an overwhelming victory, and hadn't suffered from his fight against both Night Wolf and White Dove. With this sort of strength, even Cross might not be able to prevail if he was still around. The most formidable thing about Cross was his positioning, his extreme long-distance sniping, while Boogeyman John's achievements lay primarily in head-on battles. When it came to Cross, everybody was most afraid of being lured into a trap and shot, but it wasn't hard to duck into a safe house to hide and rest. In a 1v2 against Boogeyman John, however, their side had been crushed. They couldn't always move around outside in teams of 3, right? Thinking that, everybody's hearts were heavy. There wasn't much of an expression on Sloane's face, but he was hesitating. Should he ask the big boss for help? If Cross and the Boogeyman attacked the fraternity at the same time, their 10 best hitmen wouldn't last 2 months. Eventually, he gave up on the idea and looked at Firefox. Get Wesley ready. Find Cross. We can't be attacked from both sides. Firefox frowned. He's still far from ready. Sloane gave her a deep look. We don't have time. We can only try. Don't forget, that boy is just bait. Firefox's eyes flickered. Without saying anything, she turned around and left. The next day, it was drizzling and the sky was filled with leaden clouds. Luke, however, was in a good mood. There had been 52 bodyguards in the museum last night, while the fake Santino and his bodyguards totaled 5, and there had been 12 bodyguards in the underground living space. There was also Santino and the short-haired female bodyguard. The bodyguards were worth more than 200 experience and credit points each, which wasn't too high. The short-haired female bodyguard, on the other hand, was an elite mini-boss worth 1,500 experience and credit points, while the weak boss, Santino, was worth 5,000 experience and credit points. The short-haired girl had probably killed countless people with her own hands. Santino, on the other hand, had probably done a lot of bad things while he schemed. Although he hadn't personally killed many people, he had definitely been the one to give the order. That was why these two were worth so much. As for the two elite assassins from the fraternity, Night Wolf gave 1,000 experience and credit points, and White Dove gave 800 experience and credit points. They were clearly on the higher end for hitmen. They might not be worth as many experience and credit points as the short-haired female bodyguard, but it was still plenty. At that moment in the system, the host's experience had reached 273,400/300,000. Credit, 289,400. Luke was pleased about the harvest of experience and credit points, but his abilities hadn't advanced. As top-tier assassins in the fraternity, Night Wolf and White Dove had basically the same abilities, and were far worse than Mr. X, whom Luke had made disappear. As for the abilities of the other bodyguards in Santino, there was nothing special about them. It could be said that Luke's harvest this time was within expectations, and there were no unexpected surprises. Enjoying his coffee in the rain, Luke wondered where he could obtain the 20,000 points for his level up. Santino was already dead. Luke had moved him to a safe house last night. He had used an inducer and basic hypnosis and mental communication. He had pulled out everything that the young master knew, and left his body there. Gianna's men would come to collect him. The short-haired female bodyguard was even easier. Luke just used elementary pheromone control at maximum power, and was able to test the effect of this ability without any qualms. He rarely used this ability, and there was no need to feel tender-hearted toward the short-haired girl. When she confessed that more than 30 innocent people had died at her hands, she was already doomed. And that was only the ones she remembered. By the time Luke collected the information and got rid of her, she had amply proven that she was worth the 1,500 experience and credit points. The short-haired girl worked for Santino and they were in cahoots. They could corroborate what each of them knew, which could be considered the last bit of value they had. The money in Santino's accounts and the cash in his secret hideouts weren't a big deal. However, the intelligence on the Kimura and the High Table, and on the relationship between the 12 members, and even the various branches of the Continental Hotel, was very useful. To put it simply, the 12 members of the High Table were the ones who had set up this underground alliance, which was equivalent to a board of directors. They each still wielded their own power, it was just that they all had a secret pact. Only the 12 members knew the exact terms of the pact. This setup copied the historical 12 Knights of the Round Table. The High Table was clearly a round table, and the members were all the knights, even the number was the same. According to legend, King Arthur was one of the 12 Knights of the Round Table, and the Round Table was a shared form of governance. In truth, there were more knights, which had reached 150 at one point. In a similar way, the High Table had also slowly expanded its power and the alliance had taken in more and more knights before finally becoming the High Table of today. The Continental Hotel, for example, was like a subsidiary company that the High Table operated all over the world. But after many years, the hotel had gradually become more independent. Winston, the manager of the New York Continental Hotel, had a high position and was experienced. He also held a lot of the High Table's resources in America, and couldn't be touched easily. As for the people who provided services, they could be considered employees of the subsidiary company or subcontracted small studios. Thus, the High Table was the highest authority in decision-making and arbitration, but didn't have the right to casually meddle in affairs at the lower levels. It was for this reason that, unless the Tarasov family had sent out an official request for help through the high table, the New York Continental Hotel couldn't stick its nose into the fight between John and the Tarasov family. The Tarasov family might be one of the major members at the high table, but if they put out an order which could potentially damage the high table significantly, the other 12 members would assess the risks first. They wouldn't let anyone use the power of the high table for personal gain. For example, Boogeyman John used to be a legendary killer of the Tarasov family. The other members couldn't directly order him to carry out a mission, because he was an employee hired by the high table's Tarasov branch, and didn't belong to the main company. At most, they could issue a mission and let John decide if he wanted to take it or not. In short, the high table, this massive underworld existence, was terrifying. It was so terrifying that when Luke analyzed the intelligence from Santino, he felt that in 8 to 10 years, he would only be able to harvest about 70 to 80% of the 12 members. And this was just the 12 members. In fact, these 12 forces made up at most just 10% of the high table's entire sphere of power. The other 90% encompassed the various service providers, hitmen who had accounts with the high table, studios, the small stores that provided tailor-made suits and maps, and the small professional subsidiary, the cleaning company. He felt that he would never be able to clean up this 90% in his lifetime, just like how he couldn't clean up the streets of America. After all, there were roughly 1 million gang members in America. The number of members at the high table, on the other hand, was a conservative estimate of no less than 100,000. These people were active all over the world, and the casualties from their battles were unbelievable. The high table had 500 to 800 hitmen, new and old, who died every year, but there were even more who wanted to become hitmen under the high table. Unless a god showed up to instantly eliminate all human beings on Earth, there would be plenty of fish who would escape the net. Luke wasn't discouraged. Instead, he rubbed his hands together. He wasn't worried that there were too many enemies, but that he didn't know where they were. As for the small fry who stole stuff and sold weed on the streets, Luke really wasn't motivated to kill them. He just beat them up when he saw them. If they were unlucky and he caught them committing crime again, he would just beat them up a second time. As for the third time, it probably wouldn't come to that. Any hoodlum who still dared commit crime after being beaten up by Luke twice would get themselves killed eventually in a gunfight. So, he left them to Selena. She was very efficient when beating up people, but she rarely killed anyone. These hoodlums were most suitable as practice dummies for her, plus, he could get half of her experience and credit points. He made up his mind that he would handle the big monsters and leave the small monsters to Selena. Pleased, Luke then turned to other things. Currently, he had a lot of information on the big monsters. It would probably be a few more days before the high table next came for revenge, but it seemed it was time to harvest the fraternity. He hadn't attacked the fraternity earlier because of the raw ingredients for the medicinal bath, and also because he wanted to get rid of them in one go. However, the fraternity now wasn't made up of just Sloane's subordinates, it would be impossible to take them down all at once. But since Sloane had dared stick his hand into things, there was no need for Luke to wait. As for the ingredients for the medicinal bath, Sloane had been to Iquitos in Peru recently. This probably had to do with the fact that Cross had injured or killed many elite assassins from the fraternity. In order to treat the heavily wounded assassins, Sloane had no choice but to stock up on the goods. Thus, Luke was basically certain that Iquitos was where Sloane got the raw ingredients for the medicinal bath. With this intelligence, he could continue investigating even if he couldn't get any information out of Sloane himself. Sloane was still important, but not as much as before. Killing him might not be the best option, but it certainly wasn't the worst one. Also, it seemed that Sloane and the others had conned a young man called Wesley Gibson into believing that his father had been killed by Cross. Wesley's own combat ability wasn't important, what was important was that Cross was his biological father. Sloane and the others had conned this silly kid into killing his own father, Cross, to avenge his fake father, Mr. X. Luke could only watch in amusement. The cold-faced Mr. X had been caught by Luke and left to Rebecca to be dealt with. Rebecca had killed Mr. X. Wesley actually acknowledged such trash as his father and swore to avenge him. Even Luke, who had nothing to do with this, couldn't take it anymore. Conning a foolish kid like this, are you men or not? The fraternity had more than 20 elite hitmen and hundreds of ordinary members. They didn't even have the courage to face Cross head-on, but dared to use his son to bait them. The fraternity had really deteriorated. In comparison, Luke was more interested in the man Cross. He wasn't interested in Cross's combat ability, but in the fact that Cross had sensed that Sloane was using the loom of fate as an excuse to kill people and make a fortune. Thus, Cross betrayed the fraternity, and wanted to completely destroy this assassin organization. Even though Cross might have killed innocent people before, Luke respected his determination to drag the fraternity down to hell with him. Admitting one's mistake was something that most people in the world wouldn't do. It was just like how people who argued online would rather do their utmost to defend themselves than admit that they were wrong. It was just an online debate that gained them nothing, yet they refused to acknowledge they were wrong. Not only did Cross acknowledge his mistake, he was personally trying to make up for it. Few people could actually walk the talk. It was for this reason that Luke didn't want to see Cross die at his son's hands. That would be the greatest tragedy for the unlucky father and son. Then, he would eliminate the fraternity first. He made up his mind. After all, the fraternity only wanted to kill the traitor, Cross. As long as there had certified information on Cross, they would definitely jump out eagerly. In the last few months, Wesley Gibson felt that his life had reached a certain peak. He cursed out the fat supervisor in his office and threw a keyboard at his self-professed, good buddy, Barry, before he resigned. He waved and walked away empty-handed. What followed, however, was suffering he had never experienced before. After learning to shoot and to fight, and to withstand torture and beatings, he had finally toughened up. Also, he had over $2 million in his bank account, plus the charming Firefox. He couldn't leave all of that. Money, strength, and women were all in his grasp. Fine, Firefox wasn't within his control, conversely, the woman was his instructor. Today, he finally received a mission that he had been destined to carry out since entering the fraternity: kill Cross. Mr. X, the father whom he had never met, had been killed by Cross. But he didn't overly hate this traitor of the fraternity. Or rather, when someone told him he should hate Cross, all he felt was curiosity. Cross was really too strong. Despite the fraternity's vigilance, 2 elite assassins had died at his hands in the last few months. Firefox, the gunsmith, the repairman and the butcher were all helpless against him, and could only pin their hopes on Wesley. Thinking that he had to deal with a powerful opponent, Wesley trembled slightly. His heart couldn't help but speed up, and he almost entered the physical outburst state. But before he carried out this most important mission, he needed to settle some things. Firefox leaned against the wall. 5 minutes. Wesley smiled lightly. 2 minutes should be enough. Saying that, he pounded on the door. Conversation paused for a moment, before a man asked, "Who is it?" Wesley didn't answer. He simply hit the door harder until dust fell from the frame. Annoyed, the man yelled, "F***ck, are you crazy?" Footsteps rang out and the door opened. A young man's face was revealed as the door opened a crack. He looked at Wesley in surprise. "Wesley? Where have you been?" Suddenly, he came back to himself and shifted his naked body out of the way. It's great to see you. I've been taking good care of Kathy for you in the last few months." Expressionless, Wesley slammed his palm against the door. The door chain immediately broke, and the door slammed into the man's face, causing him to fall backward. Wesley walked in, ignored the man on the floor, and went to the bathroom. A moment later, he walked out with an opaque plastic bag. It contained the gun he had hidden in the toilet tank. He kicked the bedroom door open lightly, and the naked woman lying on the bed looked over. "Barry, Wesley. You're back." Wesley glanced at her before he walked straight to the nightstand. He opened a drawer and took out a small box. After opening the box and checking that the photo of his mother was still inside, he closed the lid and stored the box away before he stood up and left. The woman was a little stupefied, but she quickly came back to her senses, got up, and chased after him. "Wesley, you trash. You disappear for a few months and then come back. You hit Barry? Do you think you're some big shot? You're still the same sh*tty loser. Barry is twice the man you are in bed. No, more than that. Hey, put down Annabelle, she's mine." Holding the white cat to his chest, Wesley smiled with his back to her. "I'll leave you my good buddy, Barry. Your Annabelle belongs to me. That's very fair." He no longer cared what vicious words his cheap ex-girlfriend, Kathy, had to say, he was himself. Outside the door, Firefox rolled her eyes and turned around. As Wesley walked over, she gave him a French kiss. Kathy, the ex-girlfriend, paused, then exclaimed in disbelief a moment later. "What kind of b***tch is this? You've fallen so far you'll spend money to satisfy your pitiful pride?" Firefox let go of Wesley and pulled him out the door. She then grabbed a football next to the door and threw it behind her. Bang! Kathy was cut off as she collapsed, just like Barry, bleeding from her mouth and nose. Firefox couldn't stand the woman's vicious words. The reason Wesley hadn't killed the woman wasn't because he could bear it, but because the woman was completely beneath him. Outside the door, Firefox looked at the white cat in Luke's arms. "Is it yours?" Wesley smiled. "It used to be hers, but it's mine now." "Then I'll look for a car." Firefox shrugged. She never thought she would help someone steal a cat and bring it back. Firefox went to look for a car, leaving Wesley to stand there in a daze. Wesley didn't have any feelings for his old girlfriend, or rather, his female roommate. It was just that this roommate used his money to pay the rent, raise a cat, buy condoms and so on. He had always felt that there was something mentally wrong with him. He had lost interest in anything since a few months ago. Even when his ex-girlfriend and ex-buddy started hooking up, it felt like it was happening to a stranger, and he didn't care at all. Only now did he understand that this strange sensation of his heart racing and the world warping and shaking around him was a gift that could be used to uphold justice and eliminate evil. So, now that he had gone back and wrapped things up, he felt relieved. Suddenly, he saw a person walk out of the dark on a nearby street and raise a gun. Instantly, his hair stood on end as his killing intent flared. His pupils contracted. Cross. How dare the traitor appear in front of him? Wesley drew his pistol and attacked decisively. Bang! Cross immediately fired back. Bang! The two bullets collided in a shower of sparks in the air. Wesley was shocked. So powerful. The next moment, Cross turned around and ran. Wesley was stumped for a moment, before he broke into a run and gave chase. The fraternity's teachings over the last few months had subconsciously made him feel that he had to kill the traitor, Cross, or he would kill everyone in the fraternity, including Wesley. One ran and one gave chase, and they rushed into an old factory zone not far away. Seeing Wesley charge over, Cross glanced in the other direction. Firefox was sneaking over. Her leaving just now had been a test and a lure. Cross knew it was a trap, but he still came. He hadn't expected the fraternity to find Wesley. He had thought that nobody knew that he had a son. In the end, it turned out that Sloane, that sly old fox, had known long ago, but hadn't done anything about it. Cross wasn't afraid of Firefox, but Wesley, who trusted Firefox down to his bones, was the best hostage. He didn't want to take any risks. He would probably only be able to leave some clues behind during this test as a warning for his foolish son. Just as he was thinking this, he realized that Firefox had been stopped. Cross saw a figure dart out of the darkness and knock her into a dark corner. There was the sound of a fight and things breaking. A good opportunity. Mind whirling, Cross immediately decided to grab his foolish son and escape. As long as Wesley escaped the fraternity's control, Cross had 10,000 ways to teach that bunch of hoodlums a lesson. He acted without hesitation. Cross instantly turned around and charged at Wesley. Bang! 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 Bullets flew as father and son fought. Their combat styles were quite similar, it was just that Cross was more shrewd and efficient. After rookie Wesley's bullets ran out, Cross pressed close to beat up his silly son, and was just barely able to knock him unconscious. Gasping for breath, Cross couldn't help but curse in a low voice. F***ck, this kid improved so fast. Even as he cursed, he was pleasantly surprised. This was his kid. This was how awesome his kid was. The father cursed in a low voice, but was secretly delighted. He picked up his son and ran. The dark old factory seemed to have quieted down. But in one corner, a simple conversation was taking place. Luke crouched on the ground with his hands on his knees like a typical gang member. Looking at the woman whose hands and legs were tied behind her, he shook his head sympathetically and sighed. Why all the trouble? Who are you? Firefox was very calm, and the aloof and charming air around her didn't change. But now that she was tied up and lying on her side, it was like a movie scene of a government interrogation. The guy in front of her was almost 2 meters tall. He was wearing a gray hoodie, gray jeans, and black military boots. His face was covered by a black mask with yellow lenses. Luke said, "You can call me Puncher." Excuse me for a bit, but I think you have a friend." With that, he disappeared. Firefox's heart sank. Too strong. This guy was really too strong. Just now, she had noticed Cross and snuck over to take action with her partner. But Puncher appeared without warning and charged at her. As one of the strongest top assassins in the fraternity, Firefox had quick reflexes. She instantly activated Physical Outburst and started fighting Puncher. Fine, now that she thought about it, it had just been a one-sided show. The strength, reflexes and combat skills that she was proud of were completely crushed by this lunatic who suddenly appeared out of nowhere. The man simply slapped away her attacks lightly and pressed her to the ground. Then, in the blink of an eye, she found her hands and feet tied behind her, and she couldn't fight anymore. The frightening thing was that the only injuries she had were the minor abrasions she got when she struggled in a few seconds after she was pressed down and tied up. That could only mean that the guy was good at subduing people without hurting them. She couldn't withstand such advanced combat skills. The repairman, who had come with her to ambush Cross, was best in hand-to-hand combat, but he probably wouldn't be able to defeat Puncher. While she was worried and doing her best to untie herself, the repairman had arrived. He looked at the tracker in his hand, only to see that Wesley's signal had disappeared and that Firefox wasn't far away. The repairman didn't hesitate as he swiftly approached Firefox's location with his gun out, ready to rendezvous with his partner. When he went around an enormous old machine, a fist was thrown at him. Without any hesitation, the repairman threw away his pistol and raised his hands. The enemy had only punched him, but his body was still behind the machine. His chances of hitting the enemy were close to zero, and dodging would waste precious time. If he was punched in the face at close range, he might die. Even if he didn't die, his vision would be severely impaired at worst or hazy with tears at best, and he wouldn't be able to aim with his gun. Physical Outburst, activated. The repairman's hands finally reached past the fist to grab the opponent's arm, and he crouched down and turned. His posture was similar to a boxer avoiding an opponent, except that he had fused joints which allowed for smoother movements. But the next moment, the fist suddenly sped up to punch him at an angle. The tremendous strength instantly broke past the repairman's hands, and that fist, which was the size of a sandbag, was like a hammer as it dropped straight down. Bang! The repairman froze. Almost instantly, blood flowed from his mouth, eyes, ears, and nose. A low laugh rang out. "I'm the puncher." If the repairman could fix the mush his brain had become and his broken neck, he would definitely roar at Luke. What kind of boxer uses a vertical punch? He probably had a lot of swear words on the subject, but that body with the dented head was tossed into space one and would never have the chance to protest ever again. On the other side, Firefox was in a very difficult situation. The rope had just loosened a little, when she heard footsteps approaching. The huge figure crouched down and said in a surprised tone, "You're quite strong. If I had come back a few minutes later, you would have broken free." "Firefox, but I'm still tied up." Then, she was lifted up. "Let's go. I'll take you to have a heart-to-heart chat with an old friend," said Puncher, before they disappeared from the factory. In a two-story building not far from the city tram lines, Cross looked at Wesley's doubtful expression, but wasn't too disappointed. He simply said, "It doesn't matter if you don't believe me now. After I destroy the fraternity, I'll have enough time to prove everything." Wesley struggled to remain calm, but his heart was in a mess. He didn't want to believe him, but this place was less than 100 meters away from his apartment, and the window here faced his apartment. This at least proved that the other party had indeed been paying attention to him. He was confused by everything that was happening. Wesley was just an ordinary young man. At least, he had been up until a few months ago. He didn't have enough experience or brains to analyze what Cross was saying in order to reach a definite conclusion. There was only one thought in his head right now: why? Why do all of you want to be my father? D*MN, I thought my father had died more than 20 years ago, but these two just popped out of nowhere. What the hell are you doing? Wesley wanted to roar. Dong! 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 Someone suddenly knocked on the door, and Cross tensed. Surveillance cameras and traps had already been set up around the building. No one could come knocking without his knowing. "Cross, I've brought you a good witness." A deep voice rang out outside. Cross frowned and opened the door remotely, activating several defense mechanisms against intruders. A figure almost 2 meters tall slowly walked in, holding a woman. The father and son, who had been hiding, were both stunned. Firefox. It was Wesley. Cross wouldn't make a low-level mistake like crying out. Luke smiled under his mask. "Young man, calm down. Your big sister is absolutely fine. You can continue canoodling later." Cross didn't let down his guard. He was a veteran in this business, it was natural for him to be wary. It was also why the fraternity had made Wesley come out to deal with him. Without his son interfering, it would be impossible for Cross to make a mistake. Now that someone had forced their way into his territory, Cross naturally sensed danger. Wesley's exclamation had exposed his position. He might not be able to protect his foolish son from this mysterious person who had unknown intentions. Luke didn't care about Cross's reaction. Instead, he untied Firefox's hands and feet. Of course, it was just her hands and feet, her arms and legs were still bound. Firefox could finally stand and talk, and no longer look like a trussed-up piglet. "You are indeed Cross's son," Luke said. "Your big sister here can testify to that." Wesley looked at Firefox in disbelief. "She won't admit it now." Luke continued, "So, Cross, can you tell me why you betrayed the fraternity and want to destroy it?" Cross frowned and didn't say anything. Luke chuckled and said, "I forgot to tell you that I'm a friend of Redback and Bloodmint. Just consider this a request of theirs, and we'll trade information here." The expressions of Cross and Firefox changed slightly. Bloodmint didn't matter. If Luke hadn't mentioned it, Cross would have long forgotten this alias that had never become official. However, Redback Rebecca wasn't an ordinary assassin. She was Mr. X's student, and had a stable foundation and outstanding talent. If she hadn't left the fraternity on her own, she would have become one of the strongest elite assassins in a few years. On top of that, she had a close personal relationship with Firefox. In a grim assassin organization like the fraternity, both of them could be considered bosom friends. Cross also knew that Rebecca had betrayed the fraternity half a year ago because of her sister's murder, and the fraternity had even issued a kill order for her. As Luke continued to monitor the fraternity, he had basically figured out the profiles of the 20 or so elite assassins. Did the fraternity not kill the innocent? They did, and it was a lot. But Rebecca, Firefox and Cross were the rare few. They didn't kill the innocent, but truly believed that they were upholding justice. Their targets were mostly criminals. Sloane, that sly old fox, simply gave the three of them the toughest criminal targets. Thus, they had always focused on gang big shots, assassins, mercenaries, and so on. As for the easier assignments of dealing with ordinary business competition and killing innocent people, those were left to other people who didn't want to use their heads or didn't care at all, like Night Wolf and White Dove. In this way, Sloane really kept the three of them in the dark for many years. Cross had only vaguely sensed that something was wrong with some of his comrades' assignments. As the saying went, you sometimes didn't see the woods for the trees. He mostly only had passing thoughts, and he never really grew suspicious. It wasn't until Rebecca's sister was killed last year and she betrayed the fraternity in her fury that Cross grew suspicious. Given that in the fraternity, Cross was the best at schemes, his deduction skills were without doubt very good. As long as Cross really wanted to investigate, it would be very hard for Sloane to hide all his lies. Seeing that Cross remained silent, Luke suddenly said, "Firefox, tell me first, whose son is Wesley?" Firefox, who was feeling uneasy, subconsciously said, "He's Cross's son." As soon as she said that, she was stunned. Why did she tell the truth? Wesley was the only way to deal with Cross. Now that the father and son were reunited, the fraternity had basically no chance of killing Cross. Luke didn't give them any time to think. He immediately continued, "Firefox gave you the most important answer in good faith. Then, Cross, you should tell Firefox the truth, right?" Without any hesitation, Cross told her how Sloane had faked the Loom of Fate's secret code and replaced the real hit list with his own list of names.